All right. Welcome, everybody, to Standing for Truth. My name is Donnie Badinsky, and I am here with the man, the myth, the legend, the undefeated champ, some would say, Dr. Kent Hovind. And we are going to be giving you the real age of the earth tonight. Teaser. It isn't billions of years old. Kent, my brother, how's it going tonight?
Brother, if I was any better, it'd have to be two of me to stand it. It's God is good. We had 50 people here tonight for Thanksgiving dinner. We're having 3 Thanksgivings in a row. Come on down, join us, brother. Are you frozen up there yet in Canada?
Yeah, it's snowing. It's been snowing pretty good for a couple of days, so I'm thinking about it, brother.
We get rain down here, but we don't have to shovel it. We like it.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Well, if there were 2 of you, imagine how many more debates we could do. We'd get you to 1,000 real quick.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is there's not that many evolutionists out there willing to defend the idea that humans and strawberries are related through common ancestry, which reminds me, I wanted to ask you, you've done about 375 debates. And so are you telling us that you still don't believe that time, matter, and space came from nothing, life came from non-living chemicals, and you are related to banana plants and walking sticks? You don't believe that yet, Kent?
Not yet. Keep trying, guys. Keep trying to convince me.
Well, that's all we're asking for. We just want to see the best evidence for evolution. Man of God in the chat says undefeated, undisputed world champ. There you go. See?
Wow.
People agree. All right, Kent. Well, what we're doing tonight is we are going to be discussing the age of the earth, and we are going to be providing the real age of the earth. And so the question is the earth ancient, as in billions of years old, or is the earth young? Firstly, we have the birth certificate of the universe, Kent, with the Bible. Right. And we know the Bible says the earth is not billions of years old. But the question is, does the scientific data confirm that same thing? So, Kent, we're going to hand it to you for a presentation that I'm looking forward to. And then after that, we'll take some audience questions, take some questions from myself as well. And so, Kent, the floor is yours, brother. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. Thank you, brother. The age of the earth has been a topic, has been around. People have been arguing this for a long time. How old is the earth? For most of American history, people believe the earth was 6,000 years old because that's what the Bible dates add up to. Jesus said, have you not read, he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? Talking about Adam and Eve, obviously. Same thing in Mark 10:6. That was the beginning. Well, Jesus is the one who did it. He ought to know when it was. Mark 10:6, from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. So Jesus said the beginning was when God made Adam and Eve. He's the one who did it. He ought to know when it was. And the Bible says very clearly that death came into the world because of man. By one man's sin entered into the world, and death by sin. See, the polar opposite view of evolution and creation, they could not be more different. They're irreconcilably different. Creation says, the Bible says, man brought death into the world. God made a perfect world. We wrecked it. Evolution says, oh, death is the hero, because if one animal evolves a little better than the rest of them have to die so that new improved gene can take over the population and slowly evolve to something else. But the Bible is very clear that man brought death into the world. 1 Corinthians 15, by man came death, in Adam all die. So Jesus said the creation of Adam was the beginning. Nothing died till Adam sinned. And it says in the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20, in 6 days, the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is. There's no question what it says. Do you believe what it says? The first man was Adam. And Eve is the mother of all living. You cannot be more clear on what the Bible teaches. We're not supposed to add to God's words. Every word is pure. Don't add to his words. The Bible says Adam was the first man. We all came from Adam. So let's look at the dates in the Bible. Adam lived 130 years and begat a son and called his name Seth. Seth lived 105 years and begat Enos. Enos lived 90 years and begat Canaan. As a new Christian, she was 56 years ago almost now, I began studying this. I said, man, if you add up these dates, anybody can do it. Adam's 130 when his son's born, and then he's 105 and 90. The dates are all given in Genesis 5. Add them up yourself. And then after the flood, you go to Genesis chapter 11, And it gives a bunch more numbers of how old they were when their kid was born. If you add up the dates, let's see, Shem begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. Arphaxad lived 5 and 30 years and begat Selah. And he lived after he begat Selah 403 years. And Selah lived 30 years and begat Eber. The dates are all right there. Anybody can add them up and make a chart like this, and you're going to discover the same thing I discovered, that everybody else has discovered. The Bible clearly teaches the earth is about 6,000 years old, not millions of years old. And it was destroyed by a big flood in the days of Noah. That's what it says. Now, you may not like that, but that is what the book says. All who claim the earth is billions of years old, I have a question. You claim Jesus lied when he said the creation of Adam was the beginning? Or was he just stupid because he didn't go to your university? Or maybe he was right. You believe the Bible is lying about the age of the earth? Is the Bible lying when it says nothing died before Adam sinned? See, Donnie, these two worldviews are polar opposite. They can't be more different. Somebody's wrong. And I enjoy telling them who it is. So the Christians worship God as the creator. He made everything we see. Evolutionists worship time, energy, and mistakes as their creator. Those three things made everything. So you got time, energy, and mutations, mistakes. Like that's going to improve things, right? Okay. So people don't understand. Let me get a picture here. 1, 5. If I told you these Bic ballpoint pens were 5,000 years old, how could you test or refute my simple claim? These pens are 5,000 years old. You'd say, wait, 5,000 years? No, they're not. Let's do some checking. Ballpoint pen history. Who invented the ballpoint pen? It was invented by a tanner, John Loud, invented the first ballpoint pen in 1888. Small steel ball, so it could not fall out and could roll around and put ink on the paper. Well, wait a minute. 1888. I claimed the pen was 5,000 years old. That just proved wrong, didn't it? It's 132 years old. That's the maximum age for that pen. That's not 5,000 is not right. After 1888. One simple fact proved those great age wrong. One fact. My claim's wrong. Then I find out plastics weren't invented until 1907. Well, the pens are made of plastic. They weren't invented until 1907, so that proves my 5,000-year claim wrong. Had to be after 1907. Let's see what else we got here. Bic Company, the history of Bic Corporation. Bic became a company after World War II by Marcel Bic. 1945, he set up Bic Company. Well, there we go. Company founded by Marcel Bic, 1945, after World War II. So Bic wasn't even created till 1945. So I know because it's a ballpoint pen, it's plastic, and it's Bic, it has to be after 1945. Now, I still don't know when the pen was created. I actually don't even care, okay? But I know it's after 1945. So if somebody tells me this earth is billions of years old, and I can show them scientific evidence that it cannot possibly be billions of years old, you would think they'd sit up and pay attention. But they don't, because they want the earth to not have a creator. They don't want God telling them what to do. That's the real problem. Let me show you an illustration I give here that helps with that. How old is the earth? A lot of people will quickly tell you, if you Google on the internet, do big numbers fit in the human brain? And the answer is no. You can't comprehend big numbers. What's the difference between a million, billion, trillion, quadrillion, quintillion? A lot. Our government doesn't understand, but it is, okay? They don't register in the brain. Satan has fooled people into thinking billions of years can accomplish the impossible. Even with billions of years, the frog's not going to turn to the prince. Okay? Evolution's a fairy tale. But let's see what billions of years looks like. We're going to cross a street in Boston. Here we are, walking across the street in Boston. Every foot of our journey is 300 years. Every time you move 1 inch, it's 25 years. So at 25 years to the inch, here's the street in Boston, 2024. Columbus discovered America 21 inches ago at that scale. Jesus died 6.7 feet ago. Noah's flood was 14.7 feet ago, and the creation was 4,000 BC, 20 feet. All of world history fits on a 20-foot piece of a Boston street. That's what the Bible clearly teaches. But see, these giant numbers like million, billion, trillion, The brain can't really wrap around those. The Bible teaches God made the world about 6,000 years ago, was destroyed by a flood 4,400 years ago, and there's Jesus came there, and here we are today waiting for him to come back. So the whole history fits in a street in Boston. Let's see what 3,000, billions of years looks like. The crazy imaginary timeline from Olympia, Washington to Boston is about 2,900 miles as the crow flies, or as anything flies, okay? If every foot is 300 years, each mile would be 1.58 million years, 5,280 feet in a mile. This line shows what 4.6 billion years looks like, the age of the Earth, 15 million feet. Well, let's take a long walk. When we get to South Dakota, it'll take us 300 years, at 300 years per foot, 602 million years to walk 380 miles across South Dakota. See, the brain can't absorb these things. If you're going 70 miles an hour, that's 102 feet per second. That means you're covering 30,000 years every hour. It'll take you 41 hours to go across at 30,000 years per hour. When you finally get to Massachusetts, you still got a long ways to go. 219 million more years to get to Boston at 300 years per foot. 300 years per foot. 17 miles to go, the big city. Well, at 300 years, 300 feet, 300 years per foot, it'll take 90,000 years to get across town. One town, Boston. When we finally get there, after walking a long ways, we finally get to the street, and there we can start. Here we are, ending in 2024. So these giant numbers just simply don't fit, and that's just to get across, that's just to get 4.6 billion. If you start down in Oregon, it's 3,000 miles across there, okay? So, but see, they want to say it's, the universe is 13.7, here we go, 13.8 billion years ago. To show you what that looks like, 13.8, same thing, 300 years per foot. You'd have to, let's say, start in Lennox and go to the Congo, Africa, all the way across the ocean. That's what it looks like, this 13.8 billion years. So, Brother Donnie, they are just plain dreaming. These numbers don't fit in the human brain. On my video number 1, if you get my seminar series, 18 hours for 50, or $50 for 18 hours, you can get 30, or you can get 10 sets for $300. We can't make it any cheaper. And give them out as Christmas presents, stocking stuffers. People will sit home and watch a video that'll never come to church. It's an amazing way to reach people. Just hand them one for Christmas. And then say, look, I bet you can't watch 10 minutes. I'll give you $50 if you watch 10 minutes. If that doesn't do it, try 100. If that doesn't do it, try 5 billion. At some point, they'll agree to watch 10 minutes, okay? Right. So let's see. The human brain is completely unable to comprehend giant numbers. Rule of thumb is the brain counts like 1, 2, 3, 4, many. You can't get after that. This presents a problem for communicators. What do you do if your argument success rests upon billions of years? To go from Lennox or from Alaska to the tip of South America. That's how the whole clear across both continents. That's what it shows. 13.8 billion years. Giant numbers baffle the mind. BBC. Numbers can't get it. Let's use our imagination. Evolutionists imagine that billions of years will accomplish what doesn't happen in an observable lifetime. And this is the whole problem. So, Donnie, on my video number 1, I cover lots of different ways to talk about how to show the Earth cannot be billions of years old. You can do it from history. The oldest written language, National Pornographic did an article 25 years ago, major writing systems. When did people learn to write? Well, the Indus Valley, they learned that about 2800 BC, less than 5,000 years ago. Mesopotamian cuneiform, about 5,000 years ago. Sumerian language, 33,000 BC or 5,000 years ago. Netherland, let's see. Earliest recorded languages date back 3,200 BC. Why? That fits the Bible framework. Here's some written language on a bone. You can watch the video for yourself. 1200 BC, a written language, 3,200 years ago. let's see, the Luwian hieroglyphics, 1400 BC, 1500 BC, 1700 BC. And I'm going to use the BC, not the BCE, before the Common Era. Come on, it stands for before Christ. The year created or date earliest known is 1800 BC from Minoans. Cretan hieroglyphics, 2100 BC. Elamite cuneiform, 2200 BC. Akkadian cuneiform, 2500 BC. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, about 3,000, again, 5,000 years ago. It's just not correct to say the earth is billions of years old. Man was stupid up until just 5,000 years ago. Is that what you guys are claiming? No. Again, 3,000 BC. The Narma palette, 3,000 BC. So, by the way, shows dinosaurs on there. How did they know that, 3,000 BC? Dinosaurs always lived with man. They called them dragons or some other name. Let's see. Hieroglyphic billboard, 3,200 BC. 3,200 BC. So the Bible dates add up to 6,000 years. All the ancient history adds about the same. Now, if you find some older than that, they might be slightly exaggerated, might be incorrect, maybe they got it wrong. Maybe some pre-flood rocks got carved down by pre-flood people and survived the flood. Let's see, what would Noah's flood do to a rock? Get it wet and then it dries out. That's it, right? First developed systems of word writing appeared only 5,000 years ago. The oldest language that can reasonably be reconstructed was modern, sophisticated, and complete. The oldest language, 18 feet ago. Columbus discovered America. Jesus died on the cross. Creation. All fits perfectly. I think you were being lied to, folks. So they're talking about the earth being billions of years old. Nobody learned to write or record a language before for millions of years. The monkeys were too stupid. Yep. Let me show you just a couple more, Donna. You tell me when to quit here. I've got the oldest calendars, the oldest system of capital punishment, the oldest, the salt in the oceans. Today, the oceans are 3.6% salt. We know when it rains, the water runs off the mountains and runs off the valleys into the oceans. And evaporation takes out just the water. Of course, it leaves the salt behind. As the water runs over the land, it picks up mineral salts. They could have gone from completely fresh water to 3.6% salt in 5,000 years. Why aren't the oceans saltier? The origin of Earth's oceans. Why is the ocean salty? U.S. Geological Service. Why is the ocean salty? 70% of the Earth is covered in water. 97% of all the water on the Earth is saline, salty. I believe during Noah's flood, it was all fresh water. Noah didn't have to bring water on board the ark. We're building a one-scale model of Noah's Ark. You're going to see we're going to have a moon pool in it with valves. When you go over a wave, you turn the valve and fill your water tanks with fresh water right out of the ocean. So let's see. Where did all the salt come from? The answer is very simple, the last line. Salt in the oceans comes from rocks on land. Here's how it works. Okay. Concentration of salt in the seawater is about 35 parts per thousand, 3.5%. A cubic mile of seawater, the weight of the salt would be about 120 million tons. That's today. But see, that's because it keeps getting saltier from the oceans, from the rain washing mineral salts off the ground into the ocean, evaporation taking out only the water, leaving the salts behind. So they're gaining salt. Nobody argues about that, I don't think. So there's a big water distillation process. Okay, you can study about that all for yourself. Oceans gain salt due to the release of mineral salts from the rainwater. Rocks on land are the major source of salts dissolved in the rainwater, in the seawater. Then you get salts coming up from the bottom from hydrothermal vents. Why is the ocean salty? Well, there's stuff squirting up into the salt squirting up into the bottom of the ocean. Salt springs. So I think that the salt in the ocean, 3.6%, is a good indication it's not billions of years old. Now, if you need billions of years to turn your frog to a prince, I'm sorry, go live on a different planet because it doesn't happen here. Seawater, let's see. Do volcanoes occur in the ocean? Oh, yeah, most of them, actually. Earth's crust is broken into a series of slabs. 60% of all active volcanoes occur at the boundaries of these tectonic plates. Most volcanoes are found along a belt called the Ring of Fire. So we got these volcanoes all over the place. Let's see. More than 1 million submarine volcanoes in the world's oceans. A bunch. Geologists identified 5,000 active underwater volcanoes, which account for more than 75% of the total lava eruption every year. Why aren't the oceans saltier? Why hasn't this all calmed down by now? If the Earth is billions of years old, you'd think all the plates had quit moving after a while, run out of energy, and settle into place. Salt domes in the bottom. Well, that's another long story. Let me go back to the beginning here. The magnetic field of the Earth is getting weaker. Jesus said, or Job said in the book of Job, "Speak to the earth and it shall teach thee." What can we learn from the earth? Well, he formed it to be inhabited. That's what he said in Isaiah 45. Today, only 3% of it's habitable. Something changed. The Earth has a magnetic field around it. No, not all planets have magnetic fields. I don't care about that. Earth has a moderately strong magnetic field. Mercury has a very weak field. Venus and Mars have almost no measurable field. Let's see. Not all magnetospheres are created equal. Venus and Mars do not have magnetospheres at all. Generated by the motion of a molten core in the Earth's core, molten iron, I'm sorry. The magnetic field protects our planet from cosmic radiation. Origin of Earth's magnetic field remains a mystery. God made it, guys, okay? What causes Earth's magnetic field? They know, though, that Earth's magnetic field, we know what's causing it here. We know it's getting weaker. I'll show you here. How it forms is one view. But we know that's what causes the northern lights. I know they're going to see them tonight pretty strong. Does anybody check? Is it coming clear to Alabama? Northern lights, anybody know? But you can see them down here once in a great while. Okay. My wife wants so bad to see them, but you got to go to Alaska and be sure to see them. Anyway, the Earth's magnetic field. There's been many books written on this and videos made about it. The Earth's magnet is getting weaker. Magnets lose power over time. In the absence of external influence, an industrial magnet alloy would hypothetically remain magnetic for hundreds of years. Let's see. Can a magnet lose its magnetism over time? Yep. A modern Sumerian cobalt magnet takes around 700 years to lose half its strength. What causes a permanent magnet to lose its magnetism? No permanent magnet is permanent. No such thing, okay? They say the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, but the magnets lose their strength. How much are they losing? Let's see, I got this stuff in here somewhere. Magnetic, cool science experiments with magnets. That's pretty cool, I like that. What is the half-life of Earth's magnetic field? 548 years. Wait a minute. We're going to lose half our energy. In 50, I'm losing mine now. Lose half our energy in 550 years. Earth's magnetic field is fading. What's the year on that one? Don't see the year on there. According to Earth's geologic record, our magnetic field flips on average of once every 200,000 years. I'll go on record in saying I doubt that seriously. I don't think the magnetic field can reverse, okay? And I don't think it's ever been proven that it did. Let's see. Earth's magnetic field is changing. Depletion of Earth's magnetic field. It's getting weaker. What's going to happen? Well, let's see. Ever since Carl Gauss made this first evaluation in 1835, about every 10 to 15 years, they've been checking it. Earth's magnetic field is getting weaker. Okay? Doesn't bother me. If Earth's magnetic field, is it presently in decline? Yeah. It's weakening in strength 5% every 100 years. See, nobody knows of a way to improve it, speed it up. Earth's magnetic field is fading, 10% weaker than 1845. Started keeping tabs on it in 1845. The declining magnetic field. Earth's magnetic field is weakening 10 times faster now than it used to be. Studies show how the magnetic field is changing. Earth's magnetic field is weakening 10 times faster. Whoa. Earth's magnetic field is not about to flip. I don't think it can flip. Okay, I think that's baloney. We covered that in video number 6 of my series. Are we about to have a magnetic reversal? Certainly not. You can read all the article for yourself. So, Donnie, I think if you look at the Earth's magnetic field and say, wow, it's got to be less than 5,000 years old. That fits the Bible just fine. God made everything 6,000 years ago. There was a big flood 4,400 years ago that destroyed the world. And so the Earth, the flood had to, the Earth resettled it. And after the flood, 4,500 years, no problem. Let's see. Today I was given the tour and talked about the ice cores. In Denver, Colorado, there's a laboratory. I went there to visit these giant freezer where they store ice cores. What is that? Well, they drill holes with a pipe through the ice and save the core in the middle. There's the coring machine. They drill down. When they lift it up, little fingers tip out at the bottom and break off the ice, and they get a sample of ice inside that core. Here's one laying on the shelf to be studied. When I went to look at this, I asked the guy, "What are these annual? Are these annual rings? The dark light ring? Oh yeah, annual rings. They call them annual rings, and they say they can go back 130,000 years in Greenland, and 80,000 years Antarctica, 800,000 years. This is called baloney. Okay, those aren't annual rings. Is the problem? Record-shattering 2.7 million year old ice core. Again, this is propaganda. Is all it is. They're counting every dark line as summertime when the snow melted on top, turned to ice that was clear. The rest of the year it just squeezed down and packed. Let's see, show you a picture of it here. So the white is supposed to be wintertime when it packs down. The clear is supposed to be summertime when it melted a little bit and refroze as clear ice. So they'll say we got these ice cores. They got huge freezer full of these things. What a waste of government money, okay? Here's a guy, snowpack at the Sawtooth Avalanche Center. It's got a whole bunch of layers to it. In one season, those layers are not annual rings, guys, they're annual layers. Okay, you have landslides or snow slides, let's see. 50 Eskimo words for snow. There's wet snow, dry snow, heavy snow, big snow, powder snow, crud, packed powder, granular snow. I'm glad to live in Alabama, brother. I don't have to worry about none of this, okay? They have these ice cores and they have rings in them, like a tree ring. There's an example right there. Well, if on a warm day, you might get a layer of ice on top that'll refreeze and make clear ice. Cold at night, warm in the daytime. You could get a new layer every day. You could get several a day. Did the temperature drop today or what? I'm out there giving tours in the Jeep and all of a sudden, man, about froze. Here's an article that says, in Greenland and Antarctica, where the weather is consistently dry and cold, glaciers are miles thick, but the annual rings are very thin. There's the problem. They're not annual. The deepest ice core measured 10,000 feet, which is 135,000 years. This is called baloney, okay? Warm days and cold nights would give 7 layers in 1 week. Those are not annual layers. Annual layers in direct, okay. In World War II, P-38 landed in Greenland. They flew to England to join the war, and they got caught in a storm, turned around, tried to get home, and ran out of gas over Greenland. So they crash landed in Greenland, right there, P-38. So some rich guy in Kentucky said, hey, I'd like to have one of those planes for my museum. Let's go get it. He paid a whole bunch of money to have a bunch of guys go find that airplane. There were 5 of them, and take it apart and bring it back to Kentucky, Middleborough, Kentucky. You can go, I don't know if you can ride in it now. You can go see it. The Lost Squadron. There it is. They flew over to England, ran out of gas, had to come back home, or got caught in a storm or something. When they finally found the airplanes, they'd been in the ice for 48 years, covered by 263 feet of ice in 48 years. They had a special tube that they would run hot water through and it would melt its way down. They called it a gopher. So they went down, took one of the airplanes apart. And see, the ice rings in Greenland, the Lost Squadron it's called. They took it apart, brought the pieces up through the hole, and put it back together. It's in Middleborough, Kentucky, if you want to go see it at the Air Museum there. They are in the ground under the ice for 48 years. 263 feet below the surface. That's 5.5 feet of ice per year average. 1,828 years, 26 years, 5.5 feet. They only went back 1,800 years, not millions. Deeper ice gets pressed and the layers are thinner because of the pressure. So accumulating all that ice in 4,400 years is no problem. And planes do not sink in the ice. The nose is always heavy. If you run out of gas, you want it to come in nose first so you can steer it. You don't want it to come in tail first. So they always balance the plane so they're nose heavy. If the plane's resting on the ice, and if it's sinking because of just melting through the ice, it would be nose down, and it's not. The planes are level. 63 feet down, they hit the cover, plywood cover, left in 1983, 8 years earlier. Had to go 63 feet to go back 8 years? I talked to Bob Cardin, right there, at the museum in Middleborough, Kentucky. He's the guy who helped dig out the plane. I said, Bob, were there ice rings above the airplane? He said, many hundreds of them. I said, how do you get hundreds of ice rings, if they're annual, in 48 years? He said, who told you those are annual rings? They're not annual. Summer, winter, summer, winter. He said they had 30 to 40 rings in the 9 years old they're digging on the project. But they're still calling them in Scientific American annual rings. I'm sorry, the annual layers. This is baloney, okay? Pure baloney. How far can ice cores be dated? 800,000 years. Yeah. Anyway, so that's another one of the many scientific indicators. How many more you want, Donnie?
Well, you've got so many good ones there, Ken. How about just about 20 more? Just kidding. What about the moon recession? That's, I think, a really good one that at least helps to put an age limit on the Earth itself. There we go.
Well, the Earth's moon, our moon, is going around the Earth every 27 days. It's 239,000 miles away, right? Nobody argues about that. How quickly is the moon moving away from Earth? What? The moon is moving away from the Earth 1.5 inches per year. We're losing the moon. The moon is leaving us in theatlantic.com. Young age for the moon and the Earth. Dr. Thomas G. Barnes, PhD in physics. The moon's getting farther away. Yeah, I feel like we're drifting apart. NASA article. Let's see. Right now, the moon is moving away from Earth about 4 centimeters, 1.5 inches every year because of tidal interaction. There's lots of different known scientific features that are causing the moon to move away from the Earth. Moon is moving away 1.49 inches per year. Bye-bye, moon. Bye-bye. We're losing the moon. Let's see. The moon is leaving us. Astronomy books are fond of quoting that the moon is gradually spiraling away from the Earth. I agree. Why is the moon leaving us? We stink, I guess. I don't know. It doesn't like us. Right now, the moon is moving away from Earth 4 centimeters a year, about 1.5 inches. I don't think you find anybody argue about that. The moon's getting farther from the Earth. Why is the moon getting further from the Earth? It's destined to disintegrate in space. Is the moon moving away from Earth? When was this discovered? The moon's circular orbit is getting larger, 3.8 centimeters, about 1.5 inches, every year. Our moon has been slowly drifting away from Earth over the past 2.5 billion years old. That's what you call baloney, okay? Not true. The moon's orbit is increasing by a rate of 3.8 centimeters, 1.5 inches every year, Cornell University. There's a law called the inverse square law. I say to atheists, now listen, if the moon is getting further from the Earth, that means that it used to be closer. How many can figure that out with no help? Okay. Well, if you bring the moon back in closer, you create a problem. There's a law called the inverse square law. If you brought the moon into 1/3 the distance, 1/3, you take that fraction, flip it over, and square it. It's 9 times the gravitational pull. Inverse square law, you can study it, applies gravity. It applies to light, the light intensity, how bright do you want it to be. It applies to magnetism. It applies to girls. When I'm a certain distance away, it's attraction. When you're 1/3 that amount, that is 9 times greater. If you 1/3 it again, overcomes resistance, futile. Okay, so the moon's distance, well, let's see. If you go back 1,000 years, 125 feet closer. A million years, 228 miles closer. 10 million, 282 miles. 100 million, 2,800 miles. A billion, 28,000 miles. 1.4 billion, the Earth and Moon would snap together like two magnets. The evolution of the lunar semi-major axis presents the well-known timescale problem. The lunar orbit collapses a little over 1 billion years ago. Astronomical Journal. See, the moon's getting further, which means it used to be closer. If you go back in time, 1.4 billion years, they snap together like two magnets. If we take the moon's current rate of recession and project it back in time, we end up with a collision 1.5 billion years ago. However, the moon was first formed 4.5 billion years ago. I see, space.com. They cannot give up on that. The evolution of the lunar semi-major axis is a well-known timescale problem. It collapses 1 billion years ago. Well, Donnie, the moon is getting farther from the Earth. Here's a model of the moon. I got a model of the Earth here someplace. Let's see. My globe. Well, over here, okay. And they're about the right scale. The moon's about this big compared to the Earth. The moon's getting further away, which means it used to be closer. You cannot go back billions of years, 1.2 or 1.4 billion years. It's so strong, it sucks it in and snaps together like two magnets. But way before that happens, the tides would be horrendous on Earth. The moon is 250,000 miles away right now, still making a huge tide on the Earth. Imagine if it was closer. But I know, Donnie, you're going to get comments on your channel here. Atheists are going to call in and text in, oh, Hovind's crazy. We know the Earth is billions of years old. You do not possibly know any such thing. You believe it's billions of years old. You can't know that.
That's
How
right.
can you? Yep, go ahead.
No, I'm saying that's right. It's a science fiction religion that they have, brother.
All it is. The human population is one more that's a good one. In 1999, there were 6 billion people in the world. 1810, there was only 1 billion. I think the world passed over 8 billion now recently, sometime in the last year. 8 billion people. Here's the population from different times through history. You only have to go back on this chart. They go back 7,000 BC. You mean all the humans in the world could have been produced in less than 10,000 years? Yep. You mean nobody figured out how to make babies for millions of years? I've seen some real dumb people figure it out, brother. Real dumb, okay? See, at the time of Christ, the world's population was 1/4 of 1 billion. 2023, population is 8 billion. There it is. I knew I saw it somewhere. 9 billion by 2050. Okay? Well, you only have to go back in time. 8 people getting off of Noah's Ark 4,500 years ago could easily make all the people we have today. Especially when you consider right after the flood, the people were still living to be 400 years old. How many kids could you have in 400 years? A whole bunch. So I think that gave the population a great boost, jump all of a sudden. Okay. Anyway, Donnie, any comments or questions there?
Yeah, if you could you pull up the PowerPoint slide again that you have where it gives a list of the lines of evidence for a young Earth? I noticed one comments.
It's right here.
I was wondering. Now, I think the line of evidence from comets, the fact that they can't last billions of years old or even hundreds of thousands of years old, is a good one because the rescue device really has no empirical evidence for it, the Oort cloud. So I was wondering if you could cover that briefly, brother.
Sure. Comets show the universe is not billions of years old. The sun's heat vaporizes some of the comet material, releasing dust particles that were trapped in the ice. Combination of solar radiation pressure and solar wind blow away gas and dust from a comet's nucleus, forming 2 separate tails, the ion tail and the dust trail. As the comet goes around the sun blows the tail away from the sun, which means sometimes the tail could be in front of the comet. Could be the comet's going this way, but the tail's in front of it because it's produced by the solar wind. Okay, it's hard for us to think of something living outside of our atmosphere. Okay, here we go. Comets are falling apart. Okay. Well, that means they used to be bigger. If they're losing material, you can't keep losing and losing and then expect to have it all unless you work for the government. Okay. 621 million mile tail on a comet. Let's see, Twitter, unbelievable comet here. Halley's Comet. All kinds of stuff on comets on the internet called a dirty snowball or snowy dirt balls, depending on whether they're more ice or more rock. They say they know of 3,743 comets. They don't know how many they don't know about. Okay. Long period comets versus short period comets. Long period comets. Short period comets make one trip around the sun in 200 years or less, putting on a spectacular light show like Halley's Comet. Comes every 70 years. Short period comets take less than 200 years to go around. Right? I don't care the comet. The comets don't care what we call them. Okay. Short period comet just stays within our solar system. Long period comet going to go outside of that. The entirety of Earth's water was delivered to us by comets. Whoa, okay. Pretty smart folks there. See, comets have a tail being blown off. This is losing its material. Well, you can't keep losing and losing. Pretty soon it's gone. Short period comets have a life expectancy of less than 10,000 years. Well, why do we still have short period comets? Because they're less than 10,000 years old. Halley's Comet comes around once every 75 years, will disappear after only 10,000 years. Typical lifetime for a comet. Well, why do we still have comets at all? Solar system exploration. Each time Halley's Comet loses 3 to 10 feet of material from the surface. Can't keep doing that. If you keep losing and losing, pretty soon it's gone. It's like your checkbook. If your outgo exceeds your income, your upkeep will be your downfall every time. Lifespan of a comet, 10,000 years. Others give the lifespan as only 2,000 years. Disintegration is directly related to the orbital period, how many times it comes, or how frequently it comes around the sun. Shouldn't all comets be gone? Yes, but there are more comets stored in the deep freeze beyond Pluto. This is called stupid. You don't know any such thing. They made up this idea of a deep freeze out there, sending comets in once in a while to replace the ones that burn up, because they need a source for their comets, the Oort cloud. Some astronomers claim he saw that the Oort cloud is named after Oort. Oort never saw the Oort cloud. Nobody's ever seen the Oort cloud. Okay? So I covered a little bit about comets. It's Jan Oort, there's his name. He hoped, he wished, he prayed that a great spherical shell of comets existed at the remote frontiers of our solar system. Why? Well, it's to replace the ones that burn out. An atheist I debated said, yeah, that Oort cloud is 50,000 astronomical units away. An astronomical unit is from the Earth to the sun. 93 million miles is 1 astronomical unit, okay, AU. Pluto is 39 astronomical units away. Seeing a comet 50,000 is impossible. You're dreaming, Dave Madsen, and all the rest of them that commented on that. Oort never saw the Oort cloud. It's based on mathematical errors. There is no Oort cloud. Okay, write it down. They've known this for 50 years now. Many scientific papers are written about the Oort cloud, yet there's not a shred of direct evidence, observational evidence for its existence. Carl Pagan said that one. So the Oort cloud has yet to be observed. Stop and think. The theory accounts so well for the distribution of comets that most astronomers accept it because they need it to rescue their theory. The need for a source for long period comets, bodies that pass us by less than once every 200 years. It's the only evidence we have for the Oort cloud because we need it. They're desperate, brother, real desperate. Yeah, I've got plenty of stuff on comets here. We could spend all day. Icy objects, let's see. They have yet to observe any object in the Oort cloud itself. But they make up a story about it, or that maybe the comets might be coming from the Kuiper belt. Right, nobody's ever seen that either. Shaped like a puffed up disc on the donut, 30,000 astronomical units from the sun. You can't see. They're making this up, brother. Only one spacecraft visited the Kuiper belt. 2019 has flew by. Object later named Aerokoth, whatever. So they're saying there's a belt out there, the Cooper belt and the Oort cloud. Okay, even if there is, you still got the problem. Where did the comets come from?
Right.
How did the comet stay in that cloud? What bumped it out of orbit? Are they all just sitting around waiting? My turn. How did they get going? They have gas pedals or something on these things? And Donnie, these guys are so desperate. They want so badly for there not to be a God telling them what to do.
They're willingly ignorant.
Exactly right.
Great. Didn't you say that's dumb on purpose, brother?
Yes, sir. That's French for dumb on purpose, willingly ignorant.
Genesis girl likes your Carl Pagan joke.
Okay.
And it's true. I would say they are polytheists because they believe in many lowercase g gods. They
Right.
believe in the Oort cloud. That's their God. They believe in time. That's their God. Have a look what a basic search on Google says. 2024, almost in 2025, Kat. What evidence is there for the Oort cloud? 2024. No direct observation of the Oort cloud is possible with present imaging technology. I don't think it'll ever be possible because it doesn't exist.
Right.
And then they go on to tell their story, brother.
It's
Evolutionary philosophy. Nevertheless, what that means is, okay, we don't have any evidence for it, but the cloud is thought. There's a lot of philosophy and unwarranted thinking coming from the evolutionists. So that comet one just destroys them. Matt, it's great to have you with us. To recap, Kent, as you said, we could discuss this topic for 3 hours. So you discuss human history, historical records, the Bible dates, of course. We have the birth certificate of the universe, salt in the oceans, the decaying magnetic field. That's a great one. Ice cores. So, Kent, you were arguing that they're not annual layers. It's basically just warm and cold spells. So you can get a bunch of layers quickly, right?
Well, yeah, the people who dug out the airplane told me there were hundreds of layers above the airplane. It's only been there 48 years.
Yeah. So I wonder, with all the layers that we see that that the evolutionists will point to, would we largely explain those layers due to the rapid post-flood ice age? They would accumulate rapidly during those years?
Some may have accumulated rapidly, that's for sure. But you probably have this in Canada. You can have a heavy snowfall and it packs down. If it packs the snow, it turns to milky colored white ice. If it melts a little bit and then refreezes, now it's clear ice. There's all kinds. Eskimos have a bunch of different words for snow and different words for ice, or different kinds of ice. So I think what they're getting is white, clear, white, clear, white, clear. All it means is cold, warm, cold, warm, cold, warm. You get 3 of those in one day.
Yeah, those are great points. So and then you discuss lunar recession. That's another great line of evidence that limits the age of the Earth. I've seen 2 main arguments. Hugh Ross, who you debated years ago, he said, well, it doesn't recede in a linear fashion, I think he said. But how does that help? How does that help them?
It lets them keep imagining that the Earth is billions of years old. It's just imagine. It's all SpongeBob, fairy tale stuff. These ones I have on my screen here, all of them are covered and more on my DVD number 1 of my series, 18-hour seminar on creation and science and the Bible. Part 1 is all about just the age of the Earth, how to prove it cannot be billions of years old. I'm sorry. If you need billions of years for your theory, get a new theory. You can't have billions of years.
I like how you also pointed out that even with lots of time, Kent, even with billions of years, they're not going to take their fish to fishermen. They're not going to take their frog to prince.
Well, see, time actually makes it worse. Everything falls apart with time. Doesn't get better. Go look in your sock. Go look in your sock drawer right now. You'll see what I'm talking about.
Oh, I know. It's bad.
Okay.
Degeneration, extinction, more of a mess. That's what happens with time, more entropy. And so another big line of evidence that they'll point to try and support an old Earth, brother, ice cores, which you demolished. That's why they're so angry, Kent. Their best lines of evidence you demolish over and over again. Tree ring dating. They'll say, well, tree ring dating demonstrates that these trees have to be a lot older than 6,000 years. What's a good response to that?
I think I've got that in here somewhere. The oldest tree. Here we go. The oldest tree. The bristlecone pine. We've got a log here in our science center out of a bristlecone pine from California, not the oldest one. They kind of hide which one is actually the oldest, but somebody brought a piece to me years ago. We counted the rings with a needle and a magnifying glass, 700 rings. Not necessarily 700 years old, 700 rings. See, the tree ring is not an exact science, dating, just like ice layers. Trees can produce 2 rings a year. The soft, light-colored ring there, it represents a time of lots of rain, lots of sunshine, fast growth. If it does not get lots of sunshine and lots of water, it'll give a hard ring. And so those rings are hard, soft, hard, soft, hard, soft, all the way out to the edge. What if you have a wet spring and the tree produces a big, soft ring? Then you have a hot, dry summer for a couple months. It's going to produce a hard ring. Then you get a wet fall. Now you're going to get 2 rings a year. Let's see. Occasionally, trees produce more than 1 ring a year. Extra ring is called a false ring. Okay. Let's see. Evidence for multiple ring growth per year in bristlecone pine. Here's the article about it. It might interest you to know that trees go back 8,000 years without being disturbed by Noah's flood. Really? This is a secular website, obviously. Guys, let me explain. First of all, trees can survive a flood. A tree could actually be ripped out by the roots, float around and land and grow again in a new location. Or it could be just because Noah's in the ark for a year does not mean the whole world's flooded for a year. Parts of the world might have only been flooded for a couple hours or whatever long it takes to kill everybody. If the crust of the earth is flexing up and down after it got broken up like an eggshell, Noah was in the ark for a year. That we know, according to the Bible. How long each square inch was covered? Probably some places are still underwater, like Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, Indian Ocean. So I think a lot of it, though, was maybe only underwater for a few weeks, enough to drown everybody. So some trees could survive that. Anyway, tree ring dating, what else got on here about? Oldest tree in the world is 4,300 years old.
Oh, look at that. Matches up with the Bible.
Yeah. They got that 8,000 number by overlapping rings. Here's a tree. They find a log in a log house and look, it's got the same ring pattern, so they overlap it to stretch it back further. From dead bristlecone pines. Let's see. They show up in tree rings. Okay, let's see. Here's what they did. Overlap. Log found in a building, some ruins, a dead tree, and a living tree. This is, I think, real shaky, okay, on shaky ground. Trees on opposite sides of the same mountain will get different growth patterns because as the air blows up the mountain, it drops all the rain. The leeward side and the windward side, it's opposite sides of the same mountain. Trees can have growing patterns, growing near each other, have very different growth patterns. Rain shadow can affect this, prevailing wind patterns. It's not an exact science. Trees can have different, let's see, prevailing wind. Oh, one tree can be growing, a big tree next to a little tree. The big tree gets all the sunlight. Little guy doesn't. They're still growing 1 ring a year, but they're going to look, the ring pattern is going to look very different on the little guy because he's not getting the sunlight. Once the big one's gone, then the little guy takes off. One area of a forest can be diseased, right beside a disease-free tree area, a disease-free area. Things that can have trees growing near each other have very different growth patterns. Disease. One area of a forest may be diseased right beside a disease-free area. A tree growing in the shadow of a big tree will have different growth patterns. Good soil versus bad soil. That can be right next door to each other. Soil conditions can vary, causing different growth patterns. General Sherman tree they thought was 5,000 to 6,000 years old. Wow, it's only 2,000, got 2,000 rings. They just make up a number. Scientists trim off 3,000 years. General Sherman, thought to be the oldest tree, thought to be estimated to be 2,000 years old. Other trees in that area are believed to be 3,200 based on tree ring counts. Yeah, General Sherman tree from the giant sequoia. I saw that years ago when I lived in California. 2,000 years old. Closer to General Grant trees, closer to 1,600. Well, what's the matter, guys? Trees can handle a week or two of flooding. Tree species will widely vary in flood tolerance. One extreme, trees that are native to the floodplains, like cottonwoods, can withstand months of being inundated. What's the oldest tree? Methuselah tree. Let's see, 4,800 years old. This one says it's 4,300 years old, Earth's oldest organism. This one says 4,800 years. I think they don't know. Okay. There's the Methuselah tree. Make up these numbers all the time. I think the Bible is very clear. God made everything about 6,000 years ago. 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. Some of the trees might have survived the flood. No problem out of me. Trees survive a flood, can be uprooted, redeposited, and survive. But they're saying 370 million years ago for their theory. Okay, so that's what I cover, Donnie, on my video number 1 about the age of the Earth, along with about 15 or 20 more scientific indicators.
So we just need about another 20 hours with you. So Kent, we'll wrap up with this. Firstly, appreciate the points, lines of evidence that you've presented, all in line with what the Bible says, the birth certificate of the universe. So you've been busy with Thanksgiving, so I do appreciate you giving us an hour of your time. One last question, because you said something about how during the flood year, it's not that the entire earth was covered all at once all the time. Maybe some parts were covered, others were not. Because critics of biblical creation, brother, they'll say, well, how can a flood explain things like dinosaur egg nests? I mean, if the whole world is covered in water and everything is chaotic, then we shouldn't find preserved dinosaur egg nests. But would an answer to that revolve around what you're saying, that some parts would be covered, others would not? Therefore, there would be opportunities for dinosaurs to basically lay their eggs and then they're preserved?
Well, the dinosaurs are going to lay their eggs when the egg is ready to be laid inside the mother. Okay, the outside weather has no effect on when the mother is ready to lay the egg. She's going to lay the egg. Okay, so then suppose the flood came a week later. Waves come back and forth, cover the nest with mud, and now it's preserved. Yeah. Whether that area was covered total, like I said, Noah was in the ark for a year. That does not mean the whole world's flooded for a year. We know the ark rested in the 7th month. So Noah stayed in for 5 extra months, because the Bible says the water was halak vashab in the Hebrew, going and returning, sloshing back and forth. If the earth's covered in water and one place sinks in, caves in, water's going to rush into the hole and then slosh back and forth, and that becomes the ocean. Okay, so I think that we'd have to watch the video in heaven of exactly the details that happen. But yeah, some areas might have only been covered for a short time.
Do you think they strain in an ad and swallow a camel with a lot of these so-called challenges?
Unbelievable. They're so desperate to not believe the Bible. It's sad.
Yeah. Well, Ken, I got to get a copy of those slides of yours, brother. Yeah. Those are really good. Excellent work for my presentations. And we'll have to
make a note. Send Donnie my thumb drive with all my slides. Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's awesome. Yeah.
Well, I haven't heard from Matt yet. Matt, go ahead. Matt. Hang on, Matt. Does your mama know you wrote on your arm like that?
She disowned him after.
I was teaching school 15 years, and the kids would do that all the time. You know, does your mama know you're writing all over your arm? Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Matt. Let's hear it.
You did it before you were a Christian, right, Matt?
Yeah. Matter of fact, as soon as I turned 18, I got them. Yeah, I went all over.
Okay.
And then you got saved and thought, oops, maybe I shouldn't have did that. So Matt, what's going on? Do you have any questions or anything for Kent?
Oh, for Kent. Actually, I thought it'd be kind of fun to do something for Kent. And since I'm a video editor, would you like me to make you a movie DVD? Because you're always on camera. You're doing something like where you just share your visuals and then you talk about them. But I literally can make like a movie documentary for all of your stuff. And I was working on sending you a text just last night. I was like, I'll just ask you in person, because you have DVDs out there. I can make you something really epic. So dwell on what you would like, and we'll be in contact, and I'll make you something really unique, really different. Really
are you in Canada too, Matt? Where are you at?
No, I'm in California.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear about that.
Yeah, really.
So who's in a worse location, me in Canada or Matt in California?
Ooh, that's a toss-up, brother. I lived in California 3 years. They drive like maniacs out there, brother. Just
even I do.
Oh yeah. I'd love to get an animation, brother. I want somebody good at animating to take Walt Brown's animation about the hydroplate theory and add to it the canopy theory.
Oh, okay.
I think they're missing because the canopy would get shattered, being super cold ice would be dumped in on the North and South Pole, and then it would take 300 or 400 years to melt back, which means when Noah got off the ark, the continents were bigger because the ice is trapped, the water's trapped at the North and South Pole. Well, if the continents are bigger, oceans are lower, you could walk anywhere in the world for a few hundred years. I want all that in an animation like Walt Brown did. He did a great job on the hydroplate theory. Have you seen that one?
I've got his book behind me up there.
I know, but have you seen the video they did, the hydroplate theory?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, very good. That animation is good, but we need to add to it the canopy. And then,
Well,
yeah.
I was going to say, with your canopy, you have a nice, elegant solution as well to a lot of the heat that's generated during the flood that the critics like to say, oh, that refutes the flood. But if you add in a canopy as per the Hovind theory, that resolves a large portion of that issue.
Right. See, as air expands, it absorbs heat. Take a hairspray can or paint can and just hold the button down. As you spray out, the can gets ice cold in your hand. If the earth had a compressed air around it, and then that pressure is relieved by the canopy shattering, solves the problem. There's not a heat problem. Now the atheists are going to have a heat problem when they die, and I hate that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the real heat problem, the lake of fire. Anybody's name who's not written in the book of life, they're cast in the lake of fire. There's the real heat problem. So Kent, that'd be a really cool animation to show the canopy shattering and also that rapid cooling effect because of the canopy going on.
Amen. There we go. Let's see. Here's the. I'm no artist or I can barely do PowerPoint, brother. But let's see. Here's the drawing. Carl Baud had this done, and it was just really, I think it's classic of what the Bible teaches about the. Let's see. There we go. I'm going too fast through the slides, but I'll send you my thumb drive with all of them. Let's see. There we go. There was a layer of ice above the atmosphere. The Bible says God said there would be water above the firmament. Genesis chapter 1 and 2. And it tells us clearly the firmament is where the birds fly. That's the atmosphere. And so there used to be a layer of ice or water above that, and then water under the crust of the earth. So let's see about the scoffers. This ice canopy would be shattered when the fountains of the deep broke open and would launch rocks up and smash it, I think. Super cold ice is magnetic. Anybody studies this topic will tell you the canopy, I think, was probably held up by either air pressure, like a big inflatable building, or held up by the Earth's magnetic field, because super cold ice is magnetic. Let's see right here. About all the coal in the world, the giant coal seams. Yeah. The world was loaded with trees. I mean, Adam and Eve would be embarrassed to come back and see our forests today. Right. They're nothing compared to what they used to be. The fountains of the deep broke open that would launch stuff up and shatter the canopy. And it really goes back to the continental shelf. I think the reason we have a continental shelf around all the continents is because that used to be the beach line when they got off the ark. This is all about the coal. You can go through my slides or Matt, you can too, on video number 2. Matt, if you'll send Nick your address in California, he'll send you a thumb drive of my slides also.
Okay, awesome.
If I get his email, or just email techsupport@drdino.com. That's Nick, tech support.
Well, that's an early Christmas present, brother. I appreciate that.
Yeah. All right. Well, go ahead, guys. I'm tired. You guys can take over?
Yeah, we're going to take over. We have some presentations to give. Yeah, all the talking I do, I'm starting to lose my voice. I feel your pain, brother. Mm-hmm. So we're going to discuss some dating methods, C14 and diamonds. You have a debate coming up next week with one of your best pals, Atheist Junior,
Again,
on carbon round 100. Maybe round 100 will be what does it. Maybe he'll convert. And then another one as well with Austin Sims. Because Cap, we need to get you to 1,000 debates. So those in the audience, if you are an evolutionist and you believe that you're related to strawberries and whales, that's common descent, please email me, standingfortruthministries@gmail.com. We want to get you into the schedule. We want to have another epic year, 2025, of evolution debates. Because Kent, we're gonna break records. So,
Amen.
okay, Kent, let's hand it to you, brother. Any final words, final thoughts before we let you out of here for the night?
I was just thinking, I have spent 1 million hours on developing PowerPoint slides to make, get points across. Okay, anybody can get my thumb drive for $100. 50,000 slides on there. All the research I've done for years. Gonna get that. Christmas present. You can get my seminar series, lots of them. Go to drdino.com. Here, I'll put that back up there. Home. No, that's not it. There we go. DRDINO, drdino.com is our website. You can order everything right there. We want to be a blessing. Okay?
Yeah, I've got your creation seminar. I got this 8 years ago when I got saved. So there you go. Still in mint condition. As you said, nice Christmas present this year. Yeah. Thumb drive, seminar series that people can pick up. And your website's drdino.com, right, brother?
Yeah, and the whole series is $50. And when you're done watching it, you can send it back and get your money back. I don't know.
But who would ever want to do that? You want to keep that, for your apologetics. Yeah. So, okay. Well, Kent, this was great. Hour always flies by with you. You're going to be back here next week for 2 debates. So we'll see you then. You enjoy your next Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow and your weekend.
Thank you, brother. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. God bless. All right, there we go. Kent, the man, the myth, the legend, always does great presentations. Doesn't even break a sweat. He's a natural. So, Matt, what's going on, brother? Good to have you here, my fellow biblical creationist. How's your November coming along?
Doing good. Yeah, Kent's done this so much he was yawning while talking. That's when you know you're like, this is so non-stressful at this point.
Yeah, he's like, this is just debunking an old earth and those people that believe they're related to pine trees. I can do this in my sleep with half my brain tied behind my back. So, okay. Well, we're going to continue the fun. This is a live Q&A creationist hangout, which means I should give a shout out to our end of the year creationist hangout, me, you, and Matt. So I'll be with the two Matts, the two legendary Matts, Matt, you, and then Matt Powell. So this will be an end of the year, all things creation event. We'll try and get Kent in for an appearance as well. Live Q&A, live discussion, live everything. So guys, send in your questions right now for Matt and I. If you got questions on the age of the earth or evolution, we're going to have fun for another hour before we wrap things up for the weekend. And so I got some points that I want to cover in terms of evidence for a young earth. We did have some questions that came in already on dating methods. I wonder if we should get this. Let's see here. The shepherd's ambassador. So whales and banana plants aren't related. Nope. I mean, they're both yellow except for the whale. They're both eukaryotes, the evolutionists would say.
Right.
So, Matt, can you briefly touch on this? Because it's funny. I find you're apologists of evolution. They love to look to homology. They love to look to nested hierarchical patterns in genetics. Did they actually predict the level of signature that we find throughout the biological world in homology? Did the evolutionary community predict that? Because we've discussed, to elaborate on that before you answer, we've discussed how it is not reasonable if common descent and large-scale evolution were true. It's not reasonable that there would be those high degree of homologous signatures, because if organisms have been evolving for millions of years and accumulating mutations for millions of years, what they would say are neutral mutations. Then those mutations over time, especially if fixation at equilibrium is true in the evolutionary model, they should scramble those signatures where we shouldn't find such a strong signature like we do today. Matt, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. One, if we're just going to stick with homology, we can easily just go to the predictions that were made. And since homology itself was actually a biblical creationist invention himself, with was Professor Sir Patrick Owen, who came up with this, the father of homology. Homology actually isn't evidence for evolution whatsoever. He was the one that even coined the modern definition of homology all the way back in 1843. And he went off of Genesis, and he said, okay, if sea creatures and birds were made first, and then land animals, and then finally humans, then we'll probably find a pattern of that in the biological world. And that is exactly what evolutionists do today. They stole his idea and created this pattern, the pattern that you're talking about, that they say we also see in genetics, which of course again goes back to young earth creationist predictions. Surprise, surprise, I know. But that's the one thing that I don't think people really understand, is that you always have to go back and see who predicted what. And evolution is notorious for stealing from creationists and then pretending as though they made the prediction when they don't. Matter of fact, they only make retrodictions. They wait for evidence to come in and then rearrange it like a puzzle to pretend it makes sense. But if you go back to 1963, it was Ernest Mayr who said it'll be quite futile to find any genetic similarity in very close relatives or distantly related relatives. Then in 1973, young earth creationist from the Institute of Creation Research, he came out and said, no, a common designer would create the pattern that we would see in all life. And since it was created recently, there would be a purpose and a design pattern that would be in all of life. And then in 2005, it was undeniable that that was true, and genetic similarity was discovered in all life. And it's exactly what the creationists predicted. And now look, no biologist had even the foggiest notion that such similarities could exist between animals of such different animals. Literally, the creationists nailed it. The very thing that evolution today says is the best evidence for evolution is actually the best evidence for creation. So don't let them ever lie to you.
Right. It's interesting because even your top dogs, I guess you could say, in the world of evolution, like Richard Dawkins, we responded to a video recently where he claims the one fact that refutes creation are these similarities, these genetic similarities in the biological world, and these strong signatures. But what you're saying is, one, they did not predict those.
No.
Two, why should they be expected? So finding those homologous and nested hierarchical patterns in the genetics of the biological world, that should have falsified evolution, rather than, are you saying that they basically just invoked a post hoc ad hoc rescue device to explain why those signatures are there?
Absolutely. They were completely falsified. So they swept it under the rug, pretend it didn't exist or even happen. And since the general public has amnesia when it comes to remembering things of the past, they just stole the idea. Darwin did it too. Darwin plagiarized natural selection from a creationist named Edward Blythe. He knew nobody would figure it out, and then sure enough they did, but it was already too late. Darwin was already world famous for his supposed theory of natural selection, which he stole.
Yeah.
So creationists always come up with these things first. It's funny though, because those that believe in evolution don't know any of this, right? And they just tell you, oh, you guys, you just make
especially the newer generation that's not familiar with what was going on 50 years ago.
Right, exactly, because they don't teach us those things in school, right? They just tell you whatever they can think of which would portray evidence, and they don't tell you where it came from. They don't tell you who made the prediction or when.
Right, they're not going to say, by the way, we did not actually predict these strong homologous. Now, I'm sure they expected some homology, right? Because life is made up of the same building blocks, building material, DNA, RNA, proteins. But it's the fact that we find such strong homologous signatures and nested hierarchical signatures. Those should be more scrambled if deep time evolution is true.
Absolutely. We look at the genome, and what do we see? Fast mutation rates. Well, how can you have fast mutation rates and such low genetic diversity in all of life? The two don't go together. You either have to have massive amounts of genetic diversity to the point where there's not much related at all after hundreds of millions of years, or you have to slow down the mutation rate to the point that doesn't make any sense at all, and that's what we don't see. So which one is it going to be? You can't have your cake and eat it too. Evolutionists want to. That's why they change everything. That's why they're against science. That's why they don't follow science. That's why they don't make predictions on these things. How come they don't make any accurate predictions with mutation rates? Because they can't. Their mutation rate is called the phylogenetic mutation rate, and it's based on the fossil record. Since the fossil record isn't an actual record, it doesn't work. Why do they hate pedigree mutation rate studies? Because they're observable and they don't confirm evolution. They confirm biblical creation timelines, and we make predictions, and they hate it. They're always trying to say, that can't be true. There must be that. Well, maybe the mutation rates slowed down when you go into the past. All these mythical stories, you know how they do it.
Oh, yeah.
Just make it up as you go along. There doesn't need to be evidence. Just make it up.
Well, because what's the alternative? Special creation, the Bible, Genesis. So they're never going to tap out. That's why it's ridiculous when they say, well, why don't you go publish your findings, your genetic findings in the peer-reviewed literature? And it's like, well, wait a minute. If we were to send in a paper that says evolution's been falsified. See, the thing is, in the peer-reviewed literature, from my understanding, you can question the details of the theory, but you can't really question the theory or the bigger picture itself. And so what they'll say, Matt, to what you said on the observed mutation rate, right? Pedigree-based studies take a dyad or a triad, basically. And so you'd have grandparents, parents. Let's say you got your grandmother, mother, daughter. And so you can count up the differences. Let's say we're looking at mitochondrial DNA. And when you count up those differences between the grandmother's DNA, the daughter's, and the mother, you get a fast mutation rate. But then they'll say, well, a lot of those are going to be weeded out over time. They're not going to make their way through into the population, certainly not going to be fixed. And so you have to look to the phylogenetic rate. How do you respond?
Very easy. Well, we can do two different things. We can say, okay, well, let's test history with the pedigree mutation rates. And we can do that because we know of a genetic bottleneck that happened in an animal species around 200 years ago, and that was in whales. In the mid to early 1800s, whaling was a massive industry. Whale fat blubber was used extensively to the point where they almost made all of the whales extinct. They think the number was around 300,000, 200,000, and they killed them all the way down to around 4,000 total in every species combined. Like the blue whale, maybe there were 400 left. So what they did is they bottlenecked all of the whales. So they took a mutation pedigree rate study, and they went back about 11 generations, and they were able to land on this genetic bottleneck. Now, the evolutionist comes along and they say, well, those pedigree mutation rate studies aren't true because we only go back just a few generations. Like you said, dyad or triad. Well, that's only 2 to 3 generations. They're not deep-rooted pedigrees. Well, the whale one was a deep-rooted pedigree, and it landed exactly when that bottleneck said it existed and when we know that it existed. So we have evidence of that. Then we have this, if you wanted to share my screen, we have another extremely deep-rooted pedigree analysis that was done on chickens. Now, I remember chickens are related to Tyrannosaurus rex, right? So you go back, you don't have a common ancestor that is a chicken. Obviously, it didn't split from a Tyrannosaurus rex, but it wasn't a chicken. It went back millions of years before it actually became a chicken. So what we did is they did a pedigree mutation rate study that was 2 lineages 50 generations deep that weren't related. That's an extremely deep pedigree, and clearly natural selection would be removing mutations in that process if evolution was true, and the clock needs to slow down. What did they discover? That the mutation rate is exactly the same as in humans. It's 15 times faster than expected. And when we look at the genetic differences, there are 220 across 200 lineages. You go about 25 generations right here based on how many mutations you accumulate. And then the generation time, about 1.5 to 2 years. Oh, look at that. You land on the global flood. What a shocker. Interesting, isn't it? How the actual pedigree mutation rates land on the biblical timeline, no matter where you look, and no matter how many generations deep you go in these deep-rooted pedigree studies. Oh, they want to ignore it. Go right ahead. It's just more evidence of them ignoring things. And look at what they said. Our study shows that evolution can move much faster in short term than we had believed from the fossil-based evidence. See, they still can't give up that evolution is not true. They just say, well, oh, it just moved much faster now. It just moves so quick. They can't break the paradigm. Their minds can't comprehend that it's not true.
Yeah, and you can just like great points there. You can just look at, actually, let me address this question here real quick. Dr. Zach Hancock, one of our favorite evolutionary scientists, right up there with Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal. And so, yeah, we got quite the debate coming everybody's way in January to kick off the year. Doctors Jerry Bergman, Dan Stern-Cardinal. We're looking for a technical professional debate between two scientists here, common descent, common design. Actually, Jerry, he'll be doing two in 2025, one with Dr. Stern-Cardinal and one with Dr. Thompson, Chris Thompson. So it should be fun. And Matt, here I did a whole presentation at Kent's boot camp on the Eve consensus sequence. I have a whole presentation on it. But even when it comes to basic DNA diversity in these uniparentally inherited DNA compartments, right? Like your mitochondrial DNA passed down from the mother's side, your Y chromosome passed down on the father's side. When you look at the overall diversity in these DNA compartments, like the mitochondrial DNA, it's only about 16,500 DNA letters long. Your Y chromosome, correct me if I'm wrong, I think is about 65 million DNA letters long. So these are very small DNA compartments compared to the overall genome, right? Your autosomal biparentally inherited nuclear DNA. Y chromosome is nuclear DNA, but it's not biparentally inherited DNA. So just focusing on the mitochondrial DNA, the paper by Dr. Rob Carter published in a secular journal discovered that there's only about 20 to 30 DNA differences in the mitochondrial DNA. Right here, the worldwide human mtDNA consensus is composed of 16,569 nucleotides. Based on the current data set, 84.1% of the mitochondrial genome is invariant. So very little genetic variation in the mitochondrial DNA. The world consensus sequence is unambiguous except for very few nucleotide positions. So basically, all mitochondrial DNA worldwide is nearly identical. There's only a few DNA differences separating any two people. Your highest would be in Africa, somewhere between 100 and 120 DNA differences. The amount of mitochondrial sequence divergence within humans since the most recent common ancestor is quite low. And then here's the number, about 21.6 nucleotides difference in terms of two people. And then when it comes to your greater differences, like in your African lineages, about 100 to 120 differences, we have many good explanations for why that is the case that we could certainly touch on. But the point is, what we see is one mitochondrial DNA sequence worldwide, a very low genetic variation, a high mutation rate. It's about 0.1 to 0.5 per generation. And if I remember correctly, I think that was based on a study of the D loop. Anyways, that's biblical time right there, brother. That's biblical time. We don't need a couple 100,000 years to accumulate these DNA differences or this DNA diversity. And if you compare the mitochondrial DNA with chimpanzee mitochondrial DNA, very different. If you compare the human Y chromosomal DNA to chimpanzee Y chromosomal DNA, very different. New 2024 study suggested that the human and chimpanzee Y chromosomes are less than 30% the same. And every single human male Y chromosome is nearly identical. Take every single male Y chromosome on the planet, build a family tree. They go back to one man just about 4,500 years ago based on the observed mutation rate in the Y chromosome. The observed mutation rate's about what, 1 to 3 per generation, brother?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not
So
much.
same thing. Now, obviously, you have more DNA diversity in the Y chromosome, but the Y chromosome is a
huge.
larger compartment, 65 million DNA letters long. So even if it's somewhere between 3 and 500 differences separating any two people, that's trivial. Again, that's biblical time being the average. Mitochondrial DNA, same thing, about 20 to 30 separating any two people. And going back to what you were saying about the homologous patterns or signatures in DNA, we know from Fatuma, I wrote an article on this, Dr. Zach Hancock responded to it, so I appreciate the engagement. The neutral mutation rate equals your long-term substitution rate in evolutionary timescale. And so that would be a lot of neutral mutations, which we would argue the debate is, well, are those absolutely neutral? Or are they nearly neutral, slightly deleterious? Anyways, because they would argue, well, that only applies to the absolutely neutral or strictly neutral mutations, so no damage done, no harm done. But I would disagree for many reasons. Anyways, that would be in evolutionary timescales. Let's say the neutral mutation rate's 5. Well, in evolutionary timescales, that's 5 new mutations becoming fixed every single generation. So, Matt, wouldn't that also scramble or mess up these homologous signatures in the genomes?
It would, and rapidly, because these are massive amounts of mutations occurring. And no matter where you look in the mitochondria, the mutation rate is fast and the substitution rate is fast. Matter of fact, that's one way we can know that Neanderthal are not as old as they say. Because when you get smaller populations, what happens? Genetic drift is stronger and selection is weaker. So if you get weaker selection, guess what? You're not going to be able to hold on to or erase these mutations like they're trying to say. And what do they say Neanderthal lived in? Populations of just around 20, maximum 40. Well, wait a minute. Neanderthal were supposed to live for 400,000 years. How can you live in small populations for 400 million years and then, or 400,000 years, and then only get a handful of fixed substitutions? That doesn't make sense because it's not true. Matter of fact, let me share my screen real quick.
Yeah.
What do we know?
Matt, take your time, brother. I'm just going to get a throat lozenge real quick. So take your time with these. I know you got some good stuff here. So take your.
Okay, here you go. Here's the Neanderthal dilemma, right? We have small populations. Here you go. Here's from the evidence. Here's what they admit. The Neanderthals probably lived in groups of around 10 to 15, including children. Confirmed that a group was no longer than 20 individuals. So, we'll just say 25. Who cares? It doesn't really matter, because when you get that population, that's not very many, and fixation would be reaching. Our mutations would be reaching fixation rather fast because of that small population. So what that means is a new mutation has arisen in that small population of 20. Let's say it's blue eyes. A kid is born with blue eyes for the very first time. So how long would it take? How many generations until now that whole population now has that mutation and they all have blue eyes? Well, when the populations are smaller, selection isn't as strong. So now you get the mutation fixation occurring even quicker. And they've ran a published study on this, and they found that the Neanderthal population cannot have existed for more than 10,000 years. So think about that. That's totally contrary to what they say, that they lived for 400,000 years. And we're saying, no, they just lived for about 1,000 or 2, and then they just died off because of inbreeding. And this study, which is published and peer reviewed, this one, of course, is because creationists found it and we're like, look how good this evidence is. We took it and they wrote an article on it. I usually have my notes laid out a little better than this, but I don't see that right here in this folder. So anyway, I guess the major question then would be like, how come there's the genetic similarity that's of Neanderthal inside of us is so limited? Well, it only takes 10 to 20 generations, which would be a time period of about less than 600 years before we're at the saturation point of Neanderthal DNA that we have today. So it doesn't take much. And that's exactly what we find inside of us. So that those numbers have been rammed. And you guys have to remember that evolution has predicted everything wrong about Neanderthal going into the past, as far back as you can get. Now, remember, any theory that's going to be really good is going to have accurate predictions coming from their hypothesis. And what's awesome is the young Earth creation model has nailed all of these things. And that's really, really good. And look at what they write here in this science article. Neanderthals and humans may belong to the same species after all, scientists say. It could rewrite the history of our evolution. Oh, surprise, surprise. Young Earth creationists were right again. Why is that not a shocker? So I guess the one thing that people would ever have a question with then is how come they have unique features? We can cover that, but that's not regarding the age of the Earth. I just wanted to show that Neanderthal are not an old species. And the next time we talk, I'll prove that they lived on this side of the bottleneck and not before that, based on their nucleotide sequences. That'll be fun. That's in how to determine exactly what a biblical kind is. I'll do a thing on that sometime. That'll be fun.
So in a nutshell, if someone were to ask, what is the best way to determine ancestry? How can we answer Aaron Ra's phylogeny challenge? How do we identify kinds? What would be a good response, brother?
I would say the best way for us to identify a kind would obviously be using genetics. And we can track nucleotide sequences back to where they converge on whatever common ancestor is of that lineage. That's the most important thing, because that's what we can show in the genetics. Now, remember, we can't go beyond a genetic bottleneck. So Aaron Ra, he wants us to tell him what happened at creation. We can't go to creation. We can only go to Noah's flood with genetics. So if he wants an answer on what God created, then we would have to go to the fossil record, and then we would have to look at baraminology. And we would have to look at the genetic diversity of species that lived before we can actually extract DNA from them and look for what's known as a holobaramin. And that would be a created kind. So there's two ways to answer. You can look at the paleontological evidence, which is more guesswork than anything, or we can go to the genetic, which is the direct evidence, but we can only go to Noah's flood. We can try to tell you exactly what was on the ark, for example.
Right. Another good way to determine ancestry too would be orphan genes, these taxonomically restricted and essential genes, where you find them in some species, right, but then in different locations, or specific in other species. And so that's exactly what a biblical creationist would expect, are these specially engineered functional DNA units. It would be like taking 3 books, and then you find certain words in one book that's not in another book, and then other specific words that's in the 3rd book but not in, let's say, the 2nd book, right? Telling us that these are 3 different creations, maybe 3 different authors when it comes to the books, or one author who's writing 3 different books that are unrelated.
Right. That's why we find taxonomically restrictive orphan genes, and there's ones that are not shared among related kinds, that, as they would try to say. So that's what's unique about it, right? Like humans have orphan genes, chimpanzees do not. Why is that?
Right.
They have to say, well, they evolved them later. What evidence? We don't have it.
Right. They'll look to de novo gene synthesis.
Right.
They'll say, well, we have this mechanism, de novo. I think it's circular. Here's the reason why. So they'll say from the non-coding regions of the genome, these sequences will pop up, they'll evolve, de novo gene synthesis. And so now they'll be taxonomically restricted. They're just popping up in a certain species or lineage. So yeah, you're not going to have any family ancestors tracing them back. So they're orphans. But that's circular because they see these orphan genes and they say, well, why do these exist? How come we don't have any evolutionary evidence for their ancestry? Okay. They're precursors. Well, because of de novo gene synthesis. And then you could ask them, well, why is de novo gene synthesis a real mechanism? Well, because look, we got these orphan genes. See, it's a circle.
It's the
rather than concluding special creation.
Right. It's the same thing you deal with endogenous retroviruses. Same.
Yeah.
Where did they come from? They need a host. Oh, but there you go.
Right. Yeah. When it comes to the origin of retroviruses, what came first? The retrovirus or the host? Because a retrovirus requires a host to replicate. And so you can't have the retrovirus coming first because where's the host? Where's the cell that it can replicate through? So that actually fits with the design hypothesis that those units were front loaded at creation. And Zach says this is an interesting point, fair point, and I appreciate this. Erica and I engaged this a couple months ago in an open mic. We did about a 30-minute discussion on orphan genes. And so he says, but orphan genes cross what you'd call biblical kinds. Fruit flies have tons of orphan genes. Yeah, what I like to say, we'll get your response too, Matt, because you're familiar with this. Is it easier to break a gene or to build one up from scratch? Well, it's easier to break or lose a gene. So yeah, you have the original created kinds that are front loaded with DNA diversity, created heterozygosity, right? Capital A, lowercase a, capital B, lowercase b. Apply that to millions of positions within the genome, you have now the unlimited potential for diversification and change. But you also get the front loading of specific orphan genes, ERVs, various classes of retrotransposons, so-called functional pseudogenes, the loose sequences, so on and so forth. But over time, what do you get, Matt, for speciation and diversification events? You have shifts in heterozygosity or homozygosity. So correct me if I'm wrong, with our model, these species over time, all descending from the original created kinds at creation, they're losing allelic variability. They're going from a greater state of DNA diversity to a lesser state of DNA diversity, right? Speciation, your basic mechanisms of speciation are what? Shifts in heterozygosity to homozygosity, breakaway populations, inbreeding, okay? And then eventually you get enough genetic distinctiveness that you can say, okay, this is a new species or a new variation. But what that means is portions of those original orphan genes are going to be wiped away or lost. And so what we see today, what Zach is saying, yeah, we do have orphan genes that seem to cross biblical kinds. Okay. But that's because many orphan genes have been lost over time. And so now we got to basically look, this is where model building comes into play. We know orphan genes exist. I would argue that orphan genes are fascinating evidence for the biblical model of ancestry, but now we need a working model, which we're doing, to trace back what the original orphan genes were. Because if they're lost over time, then yeah, you might have orphan genes even within your felid family, right, Matt? We might say lions, tigers, leopards, jaguars, cheetahs. We might say they all go back to a common archetype. But as these variations come about, spread out to different parts of the globe, then some of those orphan genes could be lost, and now they're species specific. Okay. But that's just because they've been lost rather than added. Matt, what are your thoughts on that, brother? I know that's a lot there.
Okay, yeah, we look at things as degenerative. When you look at the fruit fly experiments, what did we notice? They lose orphan genes over time because of generation times. So if their females are younger, the lineage produces less orphan genes. They bred fruit flies having such young females that eventually ran out of orphan genes. So they actually were born with none. So I made a prediction based on Nathaniel Jensen's prediction that African people groups have faster generation times at the age of around 15. So therefore they've had more generations to make it look like they have more genetic diversity. So if that's true, that's very similar to the fruit fly experiments, where Africans then should have less orphan genes than the rest of the human population. That was a prediction made by the biblical creation model, based on what we see in the laboratory, based on Nathaniel Jensen's predictions. So I combined the two. And real quick, Boot, I'm trying to send you, I have to join the chat. Hold on. Sorry. You're going into a debate right now and you're looking for an answer for something. I just logged in to give it to you, and I am trying to join the chat. And here we go. Hold on, here you go. Watch that video and you'll be ready for your debate. By the way, he just asked, he said, is there any evidence for dinosaur with man? It's not really the age of the earth related in general, but I guess it could be, especially once
right. Yeah. Especially because if dinosaurs and man existed together, then that would imply a younger
Yeah.
Earth. His question here, so you're saying he's preparing for a debate. So he says, if the flood caused the fossil record, why are the fossil layers consistent throughout the world? Well, that's an evolutionary assertion, but what we actually see in terms of the fossil record pattern, the pervasive pattern observed in the fossil record is what? Sudden appearance, stasis, extinction. We see countless examples of living fossils. I did a whole 3-part series with Dr. Carl Werner on that. And so this quick answer won't do that series justice. I highly recommend people check that out. And so we don't see the kind of evolution in the fossil record that would need to take place to take your particles to people, fish to fishermen. We've also had a conference on flood boundaries with John Mackay, who is a young Earth creationist geologist. And in Australia, they do these flume experiments, and they've seen these layers in the geological rock strata form rapidly. They've even seen limestone form in their strata machines. They've in their fossil tank deposit, where they basically show a tree standing upright, and the calcium carbonate, this is what John Mackay taught us in our conference with him, it'll fall out of the solution, and then you can see the crystal calcium carbonate forming on the spot. And so you can see, again, in these flume tanks, in these experiments, these layers that evolutionists argue form over millions to billions of years. They form before your eyes. So with the right conditions, you can get those layers forming rapidly. So I would say when it comes to the fossil record, that is more of an assertion and doesn't necessarily fit reality, especially when you take a deep dive into the nature of living fossils, which there are a lot. Anyways, Matt, go ahead, brother.
Right. Like if I was going to be debating the fossil record, first of all, I would just say the names that you hear are going to give dates and make it sound like evolution is true. But all we have to do, again, is go back to predictions. What was made? Darwinian slow gradualism. We can go through every single one of these, but all you have to know is that was what was predicted, what you see on your screen. What did they find? Everything else but that. Literally stasis, ghost lineages, extreme evolution called punctuated equilibrium, and rapid radiation, ghost lineages forming out of nowhere, Lazarus taxons. Literally, you couldn't get a more failed prediction than the fossil record. It is easy to debunk and completely easy to destroy. The reasons Africans have more diversity is simple. Oh, that's the great assumption, sure. But then again, you can go to this South America where they all arrived at the same time and they have massive amounts of genetic diversity, with some lineages looking like they had been there for thousands of years, and then others look like they just got there last week.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I appreciate this comment because, you and I, Matt, we like to engage these more technical points. And Dr. Hancock here is definitely technically minded. And so I wonder what Zach would think about these possible solutions that I've put forth as to why, and then Matt, maybe you can speak to it too, as to why Africans have more diversity is, well, firstly, wherever you put the epicenter of genetic diversity, because they'll look to the nested patterns in Africans and non-Africans, wherever you place that epicenter of genetic diversity, everything else is going to nest within there, right? And it turns out that the epicenter of genetic diversity is right around the Middle East and Africa. So you're going to put it in the Middle East, or are you going to put it in Africa? So I would argue, and I'd be curious as to Zach's thoughts here, because he definitely knows his stuff on this, which makes him more fun to engage. And so determining where we're going to place the epicenter of genetic diversity relies on a lot of assumptions. And I would argue many of them being unknowable. And so realistically, for us as creationists, all we need is one or a combination of these, okay? So faster mutation rates in African lineages, selective sweeps, that's a big one, where let's say there was a selective sweep across Eurasia that resulted in your older lineages being completely wiped out. So wouldn't that mean that they would have had greater diversity, but now they're wiped out? Okay. And now you have your lineages in Africa being the ones that remain or survive. Okay. The older lineages in Africa survive. The other ones are wiped out. Okay. So now we don't have those existing today to compare. Or Africa could have had a higher initial population size where many people coming out of Babel, they move into Africa in waves, right? Greater amounts of people move into Africa, waves and waves. And then many of Noah's descendants could have moved into Africa, therefore bringing in a lot of diversity for Africa to start with. So, there's a few. I think the selective sweeps alone could answer that challenge, but you could have all of those at play to explain the African diversity. What are your thoughts, Matt?
The first thing that come into my mind is Africans have more PRDM9 spots where recombination can happen faster, speeding up mutation rates. We know that places that are hotter in temperature have more mutation rates. When Parsons did a study on mutation rates and he was looking at the colder regions where the Amish lived, they had a slower mutation rate by like 14 to 17%. Massive amount of difference. So we know that different populations have different mutation rates. Then we have generation time. Nathaniel Jensen said they've had about twice the amount of populations. Why? Because their generation time was around 15 years. We also have smaller population size. So there you go. You get weaker selection removing mutations that in a smaller population size was reach fixation more. That's why Africans have more of those. It's so easy to answer. Then he said there's all the studies point to a most recent common ancestor in Africa using coalescence. No, they don't. Here's a study that was done that shows the most recent common ancestor lived 3000 BC and was in Asia, and that was using a coalescence model. I'm getting it right now. Don't worry. And he must be more of a critic, not looking at our evidence, because he should know this by now. This is like so simple to answer. It's ridiculous. He goes, the bottleneck was 200,000 years ago. Yeah, that's what Google says. But if you want to ignore every observable empirical mutation rate study that shows that's not true, then go ahead. Go feel free to ignore it. It's fine. I'm going to grab that study now. Be right back.
Yeah, take your time, because also we've pointed out that, okay, you have more diversity in Africa, right? As you're pulling up the study. But overall, humans have lower levels of genetic diversity. We also know, and I've spoken to the reality of linkage blocks. Why, if we've been evolving for a couple 100,000 years since Africa, why do we still have such large linkage blocks? If I remember correctly, some of these linkage blocks have 10,000 or more nucleotides, and there's no evidence of recombination or gene conversion having occurred to break up these linkage blocks, as in the genomes of both Africans and non-Africans should be more scrambled, since you're getting recombination, you're getting gene conversion. Okay. And so over 200,000 years, you'd expect a more scrambled genome with smaller linkage blocks. The fact that we still have large linkage blocks tells me that there haven't been that many generations. There's only been a couple hundred generations, let's say, since the flood, because recombination and gene conversion have not been at play for a long enough period of time to scramble up those linkage blocks more. But I would argue that if deep time evolution were true and human evolution were true, with all the rounds of recombination and gene conversion over the last 200,000 years, we should have a more scrambled genome with smaller linkage blocks. So the bigger picture is low diversity, large linkage blocks, fast mutation rates. Those point us to a recent origins of humans. Now, yes, within the human population that has low diversity, Africans have more. But again, I think there are numerous good reasons for that. one being a selective sweep, where we have a sweep across Eurasia that results in older lineages being wiped out, with older lineages in Africa remaining or surviving. There we go. That explains it. Zach says linkage is a result of inbreeding. Yeah, there would be a lot of inbreeding in the evolutionary model because they have this out of Africa population bottleneck to explain the low diversity today, right? Every single human's 99.999% the same. Well, why is that? Well, if creation's true, God creates two people initially, Adam and Eve. Therefore, right off the bat, that restricts levels of genetic variation. That's what we'd expect. But if deep time evolution were true, and we've been evolving for millions of years, we've been evolving for a couple 100,000 years since the out of Africa dispersal event, that would be a lot of genes floating around those populations. So you'd expect higher levels of genetic diversity. So yeah, the evolutionary model would require a lot of inbreeding for that prolonged bottleneck to reduce the necessary levels of heterozygosity, increase the necessary levels of homozygosity. But I guess I'm unsure as to how inbreeding could solve the linkage problem. Because remember, there are worldviews at play. We all have our basic presuppositions. We all have our worldviews, the creation worldview, the naturalistic worldview, okay? And therefore, both sides are going to, from time to time, require a rescue device because we're interpreting the data, we're interpreting the evidence in light of our worldviews. And so when it comes to the low diversity in humans, that was not predicted by evolutionary scientists. But once the data came out, well, of course, they have a worldview. Okay, so they're going to have to look at that data and explain it in light of their worldview. And that's where they came up with this near extinction event, the population bottleneck. And from time to time, creationists have to do the same thing. So then the question becomes, how reasonable is that rescue device? What's the most parsimonious explanation? So for example, African diversity, I provided 4 or 5 reasonable explanations for that. So, okay. Matt, looks like you have your...
Oh, no, I just threw that up because that was the study I was telling you guys about, where he said, oh, coalescence always puts the common ancestor in Africa, and it's always about 200,000 years ago. It's like, no, here it is. The most recent common ancestor just a few thousand years ago. The most recent common ancestor was nearly always found in Eastern Asia and lived about 3000 BC. And that's the name of the study. Anyway, just thought I would throw that up there because you can read all the pedigree mutation rate studies, and the this one was run on a simulation. Basically, they modeled the different forms of the observable mutation rates, not assuming evolution, and this is what they got exactly on the biblical timeline. Somebody asked about the radiometric dating, by the way, it's stuff too. They said, what about potassium argon dating from lava flows and radiometric dating? That's on the age of the Earth for sure.
Yeah, so we'll slowly move towards the age of the Earth, like back. Well, this is the age of the Earth, but more evidence from geology, things like that. And so let me address this real quick. Yes, what I said about the fossil record does address his question, because again, those scientists like John Mackay, Joseph Hubbard, and others that are in the field looking for fossils, they've pointed out, we've done full conferences and programs on this channel, that what you actually find is contrary to what the textbooks show you. You find mixed environments. So wherever they dig, they find land creatures with plants, with marine animals. So you might get a land creature mixed with a shark, mixed with a certain type of plant. So it's mixed environments wherever you look. Okay. Your general picture, sure, take the so-called geologic column that's vertical, flip it horizontally. And now what you see is burial by ecosystems and communities. The Cambrian community, the Ordovician community, okay, your Jurassic community, Triassic. And so during that flood year, again, we largely find mixed environments in the fossil record, but your bigger picture is a sequence that is based on burial order of communities during the flood, because you'd have different communities living in different places without much overlap. Okay. We find more overlap today. Of course, the real estate's been changed. So it does answer the question. Let's address this super chat, brother, and then we'll move into some dating methods, because you wrote a book on dating methods. It's a bestseller. It's an award-winning book because the evolutionists love it so much.
More critics bought it than creationists.
Right. Yeah. They love their dating methods. So
Yeah,
the amazing Jimmy, $10 super chat. I appreciate the support, Jimmy. Hey, fellas, what do you believe Neanderthals were? I think they were a highly inbred people group that came about after the Tower of Babel dispersal. It could have even been before. Just a small family branches off after the flood. They become isolated. Neanderthals could be your end stage Heidelbergensis, where you get an isolated human group. And because of their isolation, because of the cold ecoglacial environments that they live in, you're going to have adaptations based on those environments. We know environment dictates phenotype in many ways, but because they were isolated for so long, what would happen is inbreeding, and they existed in small groups, small pockets of groups. And so the inbreeding would lead to rapid and accelerated genetic degeneration, where these recessive mutations, they would come to the forefront and they would result in genetic damage, because inbreeding reveals the hidden reservoir of genetic mistakes. We understand that Neanderthals genetically were 40% less fit than modern humans. But again, this is the end stage Neanderthal that we're looking at. They were one of the most, if not the most, inbred people group that we've ever seen. Their rungs of homozygosity are huge. What that is just stretches of identical letters. That's homozygosity, the same, rather than heterozygosity, which is different. Okay. Heterozygosity would be capital A in genetics, basic alleles, capital A, lowercase a, capital B, lowercase b. Homozygous would be capital A, capital A, capital B, capital B. And so they have these massive stretches of identical letters, which suggests inbreeding. And so they were either driven to extinction because of that, or simply assimilated with modern humans, which is probably more likely the case because we have their genes, which means we mated with them, we had children with them, we intermingled and interbred with them. Anyways, Matt, I see you have a visual here, brother. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. No, I just like this visual because it kind of shows, you know, the perception of the genetic variation of the people that might have been. Here's what could have been on the ark, for example. Remember, it wasn't just Noah. He had 3 sons, and their daughters could have had a lot of phenotypic diversity as well. And we just don't know what they look like. But what we do see is that ancient man had massive amounts of phenotypic diversity, and then they slowly lost it. And then what happened is probably during the Ice Age, and then the Tower of Babel, and then the dispersion and the change of diet. And then going from an Ice Age to a warming up, you're going to get a lot of phenotypic diversity that changes all of a sudden rapidly. And that is what we see. And our model obviously shows and predicts exactly what would be mixed with the human variation. I just like this picture because it could show all the variation. And then let's see, well, I think I was in the geology folder. Nope, I was in another one. I have all these folders ready to go for tonight. Here we go. What is the kind?
And we've got unlimited.
This shows you kind of what happened. There's different lineages that went extinct. They became too isolated, went off of very small population groups, and inbred until they absolutely died. And then
and looking at that photo, brother, I really like it. Go back to it.
Yeah.
Just for the audience sake. So notice you have the ark, right? And so you have Noah and his family, right? Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, their 3 wives. And so they wouldn't have been highly inbred or degenerate genetically at all. Noah could have looked more close to a Heidelbergensis, perhaps. They were very robust, interesting people group. But from there, the human population, they don't spread out until Babel. They don't take God's command seriously to spread out, to be fruitful, to be multiply. And so God forces that at Babel with the confusion of the languages. So before we get to Babel in the middle, though, Matt, you seem to suggest, and I think I agree with you, that certain families, could have been a family of 2, family of 4, 5, they could have actually moved out from your parent population. So they'd be a daughter population. They spread out and become isolated. And therefore, some of these so-called hominins, like Neanderthals, Erectus, Hobbit, Naledi, their phenotype could have manifested even before Babel.
Right. So we're talking about like groups of people that migrated, traveled, looked around at different things, maybe could have went into Africa itself, and then not done so well because, again, small populations. And then here's how we know. If we're looking at the fossil record and we want to say, okay, if we just remove the dates, what's it going to look like? Well, we find that you get primates inhabiting areas first, and then they're in lower rock layers. And then in the above rock layers, you land on humans. So it would look like this. What we're seeing is we see primates, because they would have got off the ark and they would have immediately started diversifying to fill the earth. Anything that went to the north would have been very, very cold. It would not have survived. We lost the mammoth, the woolly rhinoceros, the saber-toothed cat, the dire wolf. Everything that went north didn't do very good at all. Everything that went south into Australia, South Africa, they thrived. They did good because they went near the equator. So humans, they congregated. Some branched out, of course, but for the most part, they stayed congregated and then diverged after Babel. That is why you find them in different rock layers. And why would there be more rock layers? You're probably thinking, wait a minute, didn't the global flood cause all the rock layers? Why are there rock layers still forming if there's primates walking down here and then they're buried in deeper rock layers? What's going on? I would answer this very easily. The end of the Ice Age. We know that the Sahara Desert went from green to the desert. What happened? Well, it flooded. It flooded again after the flood from the melt off of the Ice Age and went over the continent. I'll have pictures ready for that next time. And you can see it wiped over the continent, buried everything. So that's why we have some of them. How do we know that all these humans live together? Because we have evidence that they live together, all in the same place. Look at this. This is one area where all this massive diversity of human skulls are together.
Isn't that amazing, that level of variability, Matt, in just that one
time.
area, the Demonaceae hominins? I mean,
Yeah.
you have, correct me if I'm wrong, you have variability. It shows the extent of variability in the human genome and this phenotypic diversity. You
Right.
have Neanderthal diversity, Heidelbergensis, Erectus, all within this. Is this like a chamber here, basically?
Yeah, exactly. This was a place. I think you can even see rooms and probably granary, and they all lived in this exact same area together at the same time period. So what are all these massive hominids with massive phenotypic diversity? Look at some of the brow ridges and the jaws on some.
Right.
Massive diversity living at the same place at the same time. Evolution would say, no, these are different branches that like diverged and evolved slowly over time. No, it's the same phenotypic diversity.
And most likely all interfertile.
Absolutely.
Intermingling, interbreeding. And so your basic biological definition of species is if they can interbreed, if they can produce fertile offspring, they're the same species. This is just morphological or phenotypic variability or diversity in the human population. God loves diversity. God likes diversity. That makes sense. You know, we worship a hierarchical God who created the biological world in a very diverse, hierarchical way.
Exactly. And we
if I could, Matt, I'd like to just real quick, and then because I know you want to go over those pictures, but I found this.
I'm good.
No, this is, I mean,
we got to go back to the age of the earth for these people.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I just want to show people this post, okay, on the Young Earth Creation channel. You can also find some of this in the pinned comment of the video. So Erica, she put out a video titled "Neanderthals Destroy Young Earth Creation" or preclude young earth creation or something like that. And so I wrote, with the help of doctors Peter Line and Jerry Bergman, extremely knowledgeable young earth creation scientists. And so we put out here a very comprehensive explanation for these human variants. Okay. So you can see here just briefly, as the people groups migrated from Babel, the many variants of humans classified by evolutionists as Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, Neanderthalensis, and modern humans arose through a combination of genetic variation in bony characters and local environmental factors in a similar way that other racial characteristics of people groups became established. As time went by, some traits, so we have an elegant explanation. We have a good model for explaining these hominins. Some traits became dominant in some people groups, likely through genetic drift and or inbreeding, but absent or close to absent in others. For this reason, some of the more extreme robust features may represent robust human groups, because these robust features, they are predominantly what these critics look to as being a so-called problem or challenge for us biblical creationists, represent robust human groups that became very specialized. Okay, and then you could read through it all again. There's a lot here. Okay, so it's detailed. The whole point I'm making is we've engaged this, and we've engaged it with the assistance of the professionals. Brother, what are your... Actually, let me finish this question, then we're going to move on to dating methods, as we're being comprehensive here, but time moves quick. So we answered the Neanderthals. Then he says, also, we have fully sequenced Sasquatch DNA. So I'm not too sure what he means by Sasquatch DNA. We'll have to... Did we find the Sasquatch and then get its DNA? I don't know. How about that? I mean, could Sasquatch, if it exists, just be a living relative of something like an Australopithecine? Because we know there's robust Australopithecines, right? And then more glacial, I think they'll say, Australopithecine. So maybe it's a more robust, larger Australopithecine that's a living representative of it. I don't know. But I don't know how we'd have its DNA. It shows the matriarchal lineage is human and patriarchal is unknown. Thoughts? Well, I'd have to see that DNA. I don't think any of the Australopithecines are related to humans. There is some overlap in their morphology and their phenotype, their anatomy, but there's overlap in everything, every creature, because what we see are nested hierarchical patterns. So by definition, you're going to see similarities, you're going to see overlap, but there's enough differences. There's enough what's called discontinuities. Baraminological young earth creationist scientists, they do these baraminological analyses. They look to continuities versus discontinuities. If there are significant enough discontinuities, then they can safely declare or conclude that these are different kinds. And that's what they've concluded based on their baraminological analyses of Australopithecines and comparing them to humans. So, okay. We went through a good amount of those questions for now. So Matt, let's hand it to you, brother. What are some of your favorite physical lines of evidence that set limits on the age of the universe, brother?
Oh my. Well,
you're thinking, how much time do I have? You got till 2025, brother.
I'm just going to give the audience exactly what they need. There's only 4 things to point to the age of the universe and the Earth itself at being old: distant starlight, ice core dating, the mid-Atlantic ridge spreading, and radiometric dating. I heard Kent talk about 2, so we're going to go over the mid-Atlantic ridge and then radiometric dating. So when you look at the mid-Atlantic ridge, they give dates of millions of years, and you can see from the chart right here, all the way down from 0, directly at the mid-Atlantic ridge, where the lava is pouring out, to the edge, where it's dates older. And then there's a couple points where it shows the oldest age. And not many things date more than a few million years old. Not much. So what's going on? This is very easy to refute directly from the literature itself. You see, what happened is they started to test the lava flows that were coming out, and they noticed that when they did potassium argon dating on the lava flows, even when they knew their ages, the deeper they flowed and the older they would date, even though they would date millions of years old, even though they were only 500 feet down. They're not that old. They're hundreds of years old. They're definitely not millions of years old. So what's happening? The study
Matt,
concluded.
I'm so sorry. I know you're going to be angry at me, but can you just pause real quick? Because I do want to do the audience the service of addressing everything. And I just wanted to ask a clarifying question, brother, and then
Yeah, go ahead.
continue after this.
No
So
problem.
with Zach Hancock, again, appreciate the engagement. So he says, and I think my response to this is going to have to be a question of clarification. He says, how do you explain the strong evidence that Neanderthal alleles, okay, so he must be referring to deleterious alleles, are being purged from the human population by selection? So are you saying today, extant humans, the human population, deleterious Neanderthal alleles that have lived on or have accumulated in the humans today, they're now being purged? Or are you saying we have evidence that your late stage Neanderthal in the fossil record, the genetics that we have of them, we see evidence for selection acting upon those Neanderthals? So yeah, they were highly degenerate, they were inbred, 40% less fit, but we see evidence for selection on those deleterious alleles. We'll see what he says real quick as we wait. Let me check one more here. So we did the fossil record one from Reboot. And then the other questions are, yeah, they're dating method related questions. We got one from dating method related questions from Creationist Crybaby. So yeah, that's what we're on. And so let's see here. Zach, appreciate it. The benefits of watching in real time with only about a 6-second lag. So he says, good clarification. Neanderthal alleles in humans today are being selected against. Okay, so because of our interbreeding and mating with Neanderthals, producing fertile offspring, those genes, we now have their genes today. That means some of those Neanderthal alleles, I guess harmful ones, because I know there are some, Matt, you know this stuff too. There are some Neanderthal genes that we have today that allow for certain traits, right? Like we know Neanderthals actually had pretty amazing eyesight, didn't they? Certain hair color. Is it like red hair color comes from Neanderthal genes?
Hair, they had freckles, they had pale skin, they had really good eyesight, they had a larger cerebellum, so they had better coordination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, isn't it interesting? Because that's the thing. Even though what we're looking at in terms of genomics with the Neanderthals, they're the late stage or end stage Neanderthals when they're the most inbred. But if you were to go to the early stage Neanderthal, they'd be closer to the flood. So therefore they'd have a different set of biodiversity anyways, right? But they were superior in many ways. We see that with their morphology, with their anatomy. Matt, they're very robust, extremely muscular. I gave a 3-hour presentation on Neanderthals that people can check out. And so some of their genes or alleles that we have today seem to be good and beneficial, while others may be more harmful. And so now we're seeing the human population today as a whole, Homo sapiens, we're seeing some of those more damaging or deleterious alleles that we've received from our Neanderthal ancestors. Maybe now we're seeing them purged. I mean, selection sees the big mutation. Selection is really good on the big mutations, the harmful ones, right? A single point mutation can kill someone. So there's not going to be reproduction, right, Matt? And selection is really good at amplifying your best beneficial non-reductive mutations. But selection is not really that good. I know I'm preaching to the choir here with Zach. He's a population geneticist, but selection is not really good at removing your low impact mutations. So maybe there are some alleles now that we got from Neanderthals that are higher in their deleterious effects than most low impact ones. And so now selection is more effective at removing them. But I don't think it's anything that is discriminatory in the ancestry debate. I think that observation or scientific reality is explainable by both human evolution and separate ancestry. Okay, Matt, go ahead, brother.
Okay. All right. Total U-turn for the audience. We're back on radio
From
midday.
Neanderthals to back to deep ocean basalts.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so basically, this study right here, we can read that the data indicates that the amount of excess radiogenic argon-40 is a direct function of both hydrostatic pressure and the rate of cooling. So what they discovered is that as lava flow goes down underwater, the pressure increases and the temperature gets colder and the dates increase. And they don't just increase, they increase millions of years over the span of like literally 30 years will go by and they'll get millions of years. So how can you trust the dates on the sea floor when we know the dates from the very lava itself isn't correct from watching it form? So the dates of the sea floor spreading are completely easily refuted from that list of 4 things. I mean, it's literally the easiest thing to refute that there possibly is in all of these things, because we can literally test it and watch it be wrong in front of our eyes. So then I guess carbon dating. Carbon dating, I think maybe Kent might have touched on, so I'll stop, but we found it in dinosaur bones, claimed to be millions of years old. Oil, coal, diamonds, all uncontaminated. What's it doing there? Remember, the maximum life is like 55,000 years. It doesn't even remotely get to 100,000, and it surely doesn't get to 1 million. So what's it doing in 65 million, 100, 400 million year old fossils? Here's a video that really breaks down how good carbon dating actually is.
Matt, is there supposed to be sound in that one?
I'm sorry, what?
That little clip you're playing, is there supposed to be sound or no?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, no sound. Okay.
Well, you probably just didn't click share audio. So either
I'll do it again, then I'll leave.
Okay.
And then bring it back up. Share screen. Window. Share to audio. I don't see anywhere to click that actually says it. Is it on the first page maybe?
Good question. So when you click share screen, once it comes to the initial box,
yeah,
there should be either in the right-hand corner or left-hand corner, it should say share audio.
Okay, because I'm clicking on a window, that's probably why it doesn't have it. So
you might have to click into it's a short clip. I mean, it's not necessary that you need to share the audio. Maybe you could just walk the audience through what's being said.
No, I'll just do I'll do something else here.
Okay.
Okay. No problem. Let's see.
So as you get that back up, let me just engage this one. Zach says, to me, this is evidence that Neanderthals were different species. I think their genetics, right? Neanderthals, from my understanding, are 99.7% similar to us. Genetically, we're all 99.99% similar. But for many reasons, I think the phylogenetics related data and just the genetic data in general can be explained from a separate ancestry model and therefore help to serve as evidence that Neanderthals and humans today are still the same species. I mean, a more recent lecture that I've watched several times from an evolutionary scientist, paleoanthropologist, I believe it was, he said Neanderthals are us, just adapted to an ecoglacial ecosystem. So he even said we're the same species. So there's definitely debate amongst those in the evolutionary scientific community, but because we have their genes, because we obviously intermingled and interbred with them, we produce fertile offspring. But Zach makes a fair point, an interesting point. He says it implies that hybrids were less viable. So if I understand what he's saying, hybrid being your modern humans and your Neanderthals, when they create offspring, that's a hybrid, because it's now going to have a hybrid. It's a hybrid form of modern Homo sapiens, or just Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. It implies hybrids were less viable. Okay, that makes sense in light of how much more superior and less degenerate the genetics of modern humans would have been as they came in and met up with Neanderthals. Whereas Neanderthals genetically were extremely homozygous. Again, I explained the just massive stretches of identical letters, the homozygosity in Neanderthals that they discovered, the deleterious alleles, the fact they were 40% less fit. There are many problems, both environmentally and genetically, with the inbreeding going on with Neanderthals. So you have a superior variant of humans interbreeding with a form of humans that still made it in the image of God, not inferior in that sense, but genetically going downhill in a state of genetic sickness, right, Matt? So yeah, they interbreed, they produce children. So your hybrid children are less viable. That makes sense to me, rather than if it was two modern humans, right, a modern human woman and man, they interbreed, they have a kid. Well, the genetics are going to be superior. So they'll be more viable. So that does make sense, but I still think that that speaks to the nature of Neanderthal genetics, the environment they lived in, the inbreeding, the homozygosity, the deleterious nature of what's going on genetically with Neanderthals. So I wouldn't argue that that means they're different species, but it does make sense in light of what Neanderthals were going through. So those are definitely some good points to interact with. Go ahead, Matt.
I would imagine that if you go to the royal lines of families where inbreeding has been very popular for generations, and they have gigantic jaws or particular traits that you can definitely see inbreeding. If an average person were to now have an offspring with those, what would you see? You would see an offspring that would be okay and not okay, half and half, most likely. Just like you see it when somebody has a child, like my family. My dad has complete lactose intolerance, can't even look at milk, and my mom has none. I can tolerate some. I'm like right in the middle. So the same thing. I would be like considered almost like a hybrid between the two. It's not. I'm not the best. I'm not the worst. But you can still tell there's the problem there. So going back to
actually, Matt, let me just say this. Then the floor is all yours. Zach, he makes some good points worth engaging. What you said makes a lot of sense too, Matt. And so to Zach's follow up, if Neanderthals really do go back 250 to 500,000 years, and they've been separated from Homo sapiens. So basically you have this out of Africa event. This means you would have had to have, if there's any evolutionists in the chat, or Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, you would have had to have two out of Africa events. Because when humans left in out of Africa too, and they left Africa, went into Eurasia and other parts of the globe, they met up with, to their surprise, I'm sure, other people groups like Neanderthals, Heidelbergensis. On isolated islands, you had Floresiensis, Naledi, not saying modern humans met up with them, but they existed. They shared the globe, right? These hominins were all living together at the same time. There was overlap. So humans meet up with Neanderthals. Well, Neanderthals, how did they get there? They didn't start off in Eurasia. So there must have been an out of Africa one where maybe Erectus left, a group of Erectus left Africa. Okay. And then over time, I'm talking about according to the evolutionary model, Erectus would have evolved into perhaps Heidelbergensis, Denisovans, Neanderthals. Okay. So then 100,000 years, 200,000 years later, however long, even longer, perhaps, humans leave Africa, meet up with Neanderthals. Okay. They've been separated, therefore, in the evolutionary model by, Zach says, correct. Other hominins left Africa before Homo sapiens did. Okay, so out of Africa 1, so it probably would have had to been, just to steel man the model, it would have had to been Erectus. So Erectus evolves into Neanderthals, basically. Okay, so they're separated by hundreds of thousands of years. It seems like a stretch then, Matt, if you're following my logic here, for Homo sapiens, if they're separated by Erectus and Neanderthals, because if Erectus evolves into Neanderthals, that's some massive genetic and morphological reshaping during the 100,000 and or more year separation. So we know that they produce fertile offspring. Zach is saying the offspring were the hybrids were less viable. Okay, but still viable, but less. Why were they able to interbreed and produce fertile offspring at all? That amount of separation, there should now be enough genetic distinctiveness where they simply can't produce fertile offspring. But if young earth creation is true and they're only separated by a few hundred years, 500 years, then it makes sense that they're fertile, right, Matt? Does that make sense? If they're only separated by a small amount of time, the modern human phenotype meets up with the Neanderthal phenotype. Yeah, okay, they're only separated by a small amount of time, so it makes sense that they can produce fertile offspring. But if they're separated by hundreds of thousands of years, that kind of genetic and morphological reshaping from Erectus to Neanderthals, I would expect that they wouldn't be able to interbreed.
Right. Just like modern humans actually shouldn't even be able to breed with Australian Aborigines who were supposedly isolated for 50,000 years before we discovered them. What are we still doing able to interbreed with them? According to even evolution, that's too long of a period to do it. So Erectus lived for 2 million years ago, 2 million. And then they evolved into Neanderthal 400,000 years ago, and they just branched off into these little people groups for 400,000 years, even though the genetic data shows they could never have lived over 10,000. I mean, come on.
Well, right, it's great points. And Zach says, and I appreciate again the engagement as always, he says hundreds of thousands of years is not that long in terms of human generation time. But Matt, earlier in Kent's presentation, he gave some really fascinating data from historical records and human population growth, okay, and hieroglyphics and things like that, that shows how humans, we only have about 4,500 years to 5,000 years worth of empirical evidence for humans and how long ago they've existed. Written records only go back about 4,000 to 5,000 years as well. So to say hundreds of thousands of years is not that long in terms of human generation time, based on what though? Because I mean, we've only got a couple 100,000 years worth of generations today of humans that we can go back to. Then from there, you basically have to interpret genetics in a certain way to get them further back. You also have to interpret cave paintings and artwork a certain way, right? Carbon dating a certain way. But in terms of the real time, direct empirical evidence, we only have evidence that humans go back 4,000 to 5,000 years. So we don't have this kind of observable evidence to say, well, Erectus evolving into Neanderthals according to the evolutionary model, them being separated by hundreds of thousands of years is not that long of a time frame. Therefore, it's not that much of a surprise to say that they've produced fertile offspring. It seems like more of an assertion or evolutionary philosophy to me, rather than based on anything we're observing today. And lastly, it comes down to the gold standard of science. Was it predicted at all that we discover? Because from my understanding and the countless lectures that I've listened to from those on the evolution side, the paleoanthropologists, they were surprised by the fact that we have Neanderthal genes and the fact that we not only mated with them, but produce fertile offspring. So that wasn't predicted from my understanding. And so it seems like in the evolutionary model, there's always these data points that come along that evolutionists didn't predict. They did not expect. They were caught off guard. They were surprised. And therefore they now have to, which again, based on presuppositions and worldviews, it makes sense. They have to come up with rescue devices or post hoc, ad hoc explanations. That's my thoughts on that though. Matt, what are your thoughts, brother?
Yeah, first of all, where are all the dead bodies if they existed for such a long period of time? We're talking 2 million years of human beings existing on the planet, and they're not there. And then what do we have? We have the sapient paradox, where supposedly human beings lived in Africa for 200,000 years, and then only in the last 5,000 did they actually do anything whatsoever. That's a paradox. And then we have what is this? Lewontin's paradox, right? What's the genetic diversity of the consensus population size? That's another paradox that evolution has that it can't solve. The population paradox. Populations expand. Where were humans expanding in Africa? There are 150 years of population size. It looks. This has long been a paradox with no obvious solution. Then we have the phenotypic diversity paradox. Why isn't there a nested hierarchy from humans that have been living in Africa in the most diverse region on Earth? There's no phenotypic hierarchy. It's exactly what we would see if Noah's Ark was true. The phenotypic diversity between all the different people groups matches equal. It's identical between every people group. That's exactly what we would expect if the biblical model was true. So all these paradoxes are easily solved in the biblical model. What do we see when we look for accelerated growth of the human history? Oh, look at that. 5,000 years ago, the biblical timeline again. When did deleterious mutations arise? 5,000 years ago. When did, look at this, human gene mutations began showing up 5,000 years ago. Oh, look at this. We are more different genetically from people living 5,000 years ago than they were from Neanderthals. Oh, my.
That article you just showed is very interesting.
Yes, it is.
The one about gene mutation, actually the previous one.
Ah, yeah. Gene mutations. Look at that one.
Wow.
Because
I mean, that fits right in line with
the biblical timeline.
The flood bottleneck.
Yeah, 200 to 400 generations ago. Exactly what we would expect to see. Then we go to pedigree mutation rates, right on the biblical timeline. We go to genealogies. The oldest unbroken chain of genealogies goes back to the royal line of Queen Elizabeth II. Unbroken, right back to Noah.
That, I want to add this. What you're showing here, and then what Kent showed, what we've discussed earlier with mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome. This is corroborating evidence. Like a lot of times you'll see the evolutionists in debate. They'll say, well, it's not that it's not about one piece of evidence.
Right.
It's about all these corroborating lines of evidence from different fields. Okay. Right. So we've got historical records. We've got genetic data from mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome. We've got evidence from genealogy right here. We've got evidence from legends, right? You've talked about flood legends, but also just legends going right back to Noah in terms of stories and genealogies, gene mutations, all of these different fields coming together to form a biblical creation conclusion. I mean, that's why I say it's a great time to be a biblical creationist, because if you are a Christian or you're honestly seeking evidence for why the Christian faith is the correct faith, there is so much here. I mean, it's overwhelming. It's why we typically do 3 to 4 hour shows on the evidence, Matt.
Right. And what I like is that there's just all kinds of evidence that corroborates with one another, right? Independent lines. Oh man, yeah, I got a boomer tab set up on.
look at all those Earth. Hey Matt, all those tabs, shouldn't it be a flat Earth though? It looks like a globe to me.
I'll keep it going. I couldn't identify anything.
You're trying to trigger them flat earthers, Matt. Come on.
Oh man, no. That's too much.
Look at all that front-loaded diversity in your computer, Matt.
Oh man, this computer.
And just like species, that they can manifest this built-in design DNA, right? For change and adaptation. You can do the same. You can click any one of those tabs at the top and boom, it's built in, it's ready to go, it's front loaded, it's ready to manifest visually. Eh?
Yeah.
There's a good analog for you.
And then just like evidence after evidence of just like everything arising at the same time 5,000 years ago, worldwide, people groups that never met, all just magically created math, writing systems, language, calendars, irrigation systems, astrology, brewing. It's like, wait, what? What's going on here? It doesn't match evolution. That's why there's so many paradoxes. That's what we're trying to tell you guys. These paradoxes are easily solved, right? They're easily solved if you just do it. And what is the evidence for that population bottleneck that they mentioned 200,000 years ago? Look, there's no strong supporting evidence of a population bottleneck. How about in the fossil record? They talk about that all the time. We'll go and look at exactly what they said regarding the fossil record, and that too. Maybe it's in this folder. I have a lot of folders, guys. Lots and lots of folders. When you make videos, you get thousands of images.
Right. And when you're a young earth creationist, you get thousands of pieces of amazing lines of evidence that you got to fit in all those folders and slides.
Exactly. Here we go. This one's good. By the way, look at that guy's cranium. Holy cow. Yeah, that's a missing link if they found him in the fossil.
Wow.
Record.
And that's an extant human today?
He's alive now.
So they find that brow, they find that skull cap in the fossil record in isolation without anything else attached to it. What are they going to conclude?
Oh man, that's a missing
That's a
link.
hominin right there, you know. Well, they'd say humans are hominins anyways, but that's a pre-human hominin.
Yeah, that's erectus right there for sure. Look at this. In the fossil record, there's nothing 200,000 years ago either. It's all inference. It's all just the assuming.
Right. Yeah. Well, you nailed it. Let's say, so it's not only the genetics, the fossils, just take erectus, Matt. They say, according to their model, if we steel man it, erectus has lived on the globe for what, about 1 million years?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say their generation time is what? Somewhere between 20 and 25 years. So they're living on the globe for 1 million plus years. They have a generation time of about 20 to 25 years. How many children, how many offspring are they therefore having? A lot over the millions of years, the million years, I should say. Where's all the dead bodies? Where's all the towns? Where's all the civilizations? Where's all the evidence for fire and hunting and living in groups and this and that? It's not there. It doesn't exist. The amount of bones that you have associated with erectus could literally fit into the trunk of a car. and we're supposed to believe that they lived on this planet for 1 million plus years. Where's all the grave sites? We should be finding billions and billions of dead bodies. Okay. I mean, humans, we've been here for 4,500 years. Today we got 8 billion people, countless grave sites, tons of evidence for civilization, towns, hunting, intermingling, socialization, so on and so forth. Where's their campsites? Where's this? Where's that? It doesn't exist because the evolutionary story is just that. It's a story. I think the most complete erectus example they have is Turkana Boy. So they have one somewhat complete example. We should be finding hundreds of thousands. So, you know, where's all the dead bodies? Where's the evidence for the story? It's not there, brother.
Right. Exactly. That's why there's so many paradoxes. And you notice that all of these paradoxes are easily solved with our model. It's just easy. It all fits. We don't have to do anything. We just let it interpret itself. And the only thing that just throws it off is people's fixation that radiometric dating is the only way to go. That's all they're using to get these dates. And then they say, well, we have to use the radiometric date to get these phylogenetic mutation rates. So we can't trust the observable thing that we actually see with our eyes. We have to deny what we see, and we have to go with what we assume to be true.
Let me say this, Matt. This critic says erectus now built cities. LOL. What a crazy claim. Well, if you're going to look to cities today like New York and Chicago, well, of course they weren't that sophisticated. But where's evidence for for their villages, the campsites? Here's a challenge. Here's the challenge to the evolutionary community. Put out a video responding it. I want to see the rescue device. They'll just say, well, fossilization's rare. Where's the billions of dead bodies? Where's the campsites? Where's the evidence for the evolutionary story of just one? We picked one example, erectus. Okay. All of their fossils that we've ever discovered could fit in the trunk of a car. So here's the challenge. You know, R and Rob puts up the phylogeny challenge.
Yeah.
Here's a challenge for the evolutionists. Let's see them respond. Okay. I don't want keyboard champions dodging in the comment section. No, put out a video, write an article, convince us that your story's true. Okay. Where's the billions of dead bodies? Where's the campsites? Where's the evidence for their million+ years of existence. All right, go ahead, Matt.
Oh, no, that's good. Yeah, I don't think they ever thought it through, why there should be like 2 million years worth of hominid species that were obviously sailing. They look it up. They supposedly sailed the open sea, and yet they weren't smart enough to do anything with their dead bodies. It makes no sense. We'll see what they say, though, right? There's got to be a rescue device. That's what they're known for. Throw in the rescue device. They exist.
Let me compliment Zach. I credit where credit is due. You know, I like to offer that. Zach says, put out a video, ? Write an article, ? Done that. Yes. Zach is a lot of fun to engage because he actually engages with our arguments. For example, ERVs, he's put out a video on ERVs. He published a peer-reviewed article on a genetic entropy related topic. So that's great. And currently I'm going through, admittedly, I've stopped, but I'm going to get back to it. I've been going through Stated Clearly's technical video on ERVs, and the next on the list is Zach's. So it's a technical topic. His video is deserving of a response. I hope he likes my answers. I do have some answers to his challenges. And so that's what we're looking for. We're looking at engagement. We're looking at interaction. What we don't like, Matt, is assertions. We don't like claims. You know, when we present this data, some evolutionists, lesser informed evolutionists, they'll just hand wave it away. But at least people like Zach, population geneticist here, at least he's engaging it. And that's what we like to see. And Matt, I think you would agree with this. It actually strengthens our model, and it strengthens our understanding on these topics, because when we see a challenge put forth to us, we love engaging challenges, don't we, Matt? And when we do, we strengthen our position.
If we didn't engage with the critics, I would have never really looked too much into radiometric dating. I would have just used the typical young Earth creation argument of like, okay, we know when this rock was formed 33 years ago and it gives an older date. It's not true. Instead, I'm like, okay, well, let's really look into this. And by doing so, I was able to actually solve the heat problem for the answers in Genesis. Pretty cool, you know, and a long-standing problem that's plagued the young Earth creation model of catastrophic plate tectonics is solved with a radiometric dating and a deep dive that I did. So it's pretty cool.
Well, and we did a nearly 4-hour response. What was it now, a month or two ago, Matt, where we went through Gutsick Gibbons video on the heat problem. And we had just about every critic in the chat at the time too, including Erica.
Yeah, she
so
even
that was
that it was legit, that there is no heat problem if you go with that, which is crazy.
Right. And we I've seen it passed around, that video, which is great. Lots of good feedback. It's passed around on Facebook all the time. People email us with questions about it all the time, right, Matt? I'm always forwarding it to you, and you're sending them the book and the resources. So a lot of people are seeing that, and they're thinking to themselves, okay, wow, here's some legit responses and counters to the heat problem argument. And we understand Gutsick Gibbon is busy, of course, but as of now, the ball is in their court, because we spent, again, almost 4 hours responding to her video and putting ourselves in the hot seat for one specific 20-minute period. Matt, during that video, you were in the hot seat, engaging all of Gutsick Gibbon's comments in the live chat. So we're here to answer these challenges. We're here to do it oftentimes live. Okay. We're not hiding. We're not running. We're not just pre-recording these. Sometimes we do, you know, like my new biblical creation series, I've been pre-recording, because what happens when we don't? Well, this is what happens. We engage the audience, and that's fine. That's fun. But it, obviously extends the length of the show. But it's very important that we don't just exist in an echo chamber. So anyways, yeah, great point, Matt, on dating methods and the heat problem. The ball's in their court. They're on the defense. We put in the work. We put out a very detailed video that we did live. And so now, we'll see what response they can do. All right, brother, I'm going to go on mute and just hand it to you. So go ahead, kill it.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I don't even know where we were. I gotta go down to my geology folder and go from there. Hold on. Okay. Geology. Here we go. Okay. We were on carbon dating.
Yeah. Carbon 14.
I didn't know if Kent covers this, so I'll just breeze through.
No, he didn't. He didn't.
He did not. Okay.
So what Kent covered, what we covered in the first hour was, I made notes, but they're deleted now. So if I remember correctly, magnetic field,
Okay.
human population growth. We went over comets, ice cores, tree ring dating. We also covered the evidence from historical records like history. So we left dating methods for this portion, brother. So
Okay.
whatever you got to get out there on dating methods, it's all you.
Okay, then. Great. So carbon dating isn't really something I want to talk too much about with the age of the Earth, because carbon dating is only 55,000 years old maximum. So if they're claiming that the Earth is billions of years old, this will not do much. But it is used as a dating method, and it's used as one that shows accuracy. I'm going to show you that it's not very accurate because we see it in dinosaur fossils, oil, coal, and diamonds. And when you read the study, there's measurable amounts of C14 obtained in all cases, and it is not contaminated. And we know from the ranked world, the Nature, which is ranked the world's #1 most cited scientific journal, that when they sent it 38 different laboratories, the same piece of evidence, which they knew the date for, they only 7 came up accurate. Every other one failed. That's an 18% accuracy test on carbon dating. That's miserable. Could you imagine if you got on a roller coaster and they said there's an 18% chance you survive this? Would you get on that? No, of course you would. That's insane. Why would you trust the science with an 18% accuracy? There's so many different underlying assumptions that go with it, and it can be thrown off by all kinds of things. Listen to what they say. This is radiometric dating, my bad. Carbon dating can be thrown off by all kinds of things. Volcanism, or carbon in the atmosphere, can throw off the dating of something. There's so many different things that can throw it off. I'm more interested in the radiometric dates. And when you go to the radiometric dates, they also start off with 8 different assumptions. And you can't really gauge exactly, like, you don't know any of the 8 for sure. So that's why they're called assumptions. And if you're going to look at all of the different assumptions, yeah, there's problems because we don't know all of them. That's why they're called assumptions. But the most important one is right here, the initial quantity. What was the exact ratio of the parent to daughter isotope when it formed? We had no idea. Why? Because we had to assume. When we looked inside of zircon crystals, when they form, don't have any daughter lead inside of it at all. It can only get there through decay. So we looked at how much lead there was and said, okay, how long would it have taken to form from the parent isotope itself, uranium? Oh, look, billions of years. Therefore, billions of years of time must have passed. And that's exactly the type of rational thinking that Answers in Genesis had when they looked inside a zircon crystal and they said, maybe there was accelerated nuclear decay. That would explain why there's so much helium that should not be there if it's old. So we see evidence that it's old while we simultaneously see evidence that it's young. So I was looking at this really cool study at the Proton 21 laboratories, where they were using cold fusion to form radioactive elements and regular elements. But there was money in the radioactive elements, so they were forming these. But when they would form them, they would form in ratios totally opposite of what we expected them to find. And the unique thing about them was, if they would be tested, they would be tested as millions or billions of years old, depending on what was created, even though they were formed days earlier. So here's where they formed massive amounts of aluminum. And here is where they tested potassium. The potassium ratio that we find today is exactly the same as what was formed in the laboratory. But isn't that strange? Shouldn't it have formed as though the ratios would have been billions of years ago if evolution was true, and that's exactly how they did form? Instead, they formed exactly how they are today. What are the odds of that? In the same ratios they were today. So that alone tells us that if you're creating something that tests billions of years old, made days earlier, then obviously the dates that you get from it are not true. It's really just that simple. So radiometric dating became a really good indicator and evidence for young Earth creation, because if we see the ratios, especially in aluminum, which has a much shorter half-life than most of these things, and we test it, and we look in the environment and it's exactly the same ratio, then we could be pretty sure that not even 1,000,000 years has surpassed and gone by on Earth. So if the Earth isn't even 1,000,000 years old, how can dinosaurs be 65 million years old? They just can't. So if you want to know more, here's the book that I wrote, and specifically on the topic, and I cover more than just that finding. I actually cover a lot more, and the reason I'm stuttering right now is because I'm getting the book detail right now so I can give it to you all. Open in a new tab. All right. So this is the Google document that I'm going to give you guys. It's just the entire book. It'll just be free for you guys for Thanksgiving and Christmas. What I recommend.
Early Christmas present, brother, from SFP
Yeah,
Ministries,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, exactly. You guys like the topic. You guys want to have answers. So what I want to do for you guys is tell you when you open this, just let it load on your desktop, and then I can access all your files. No, I'm just kidding. What I want you to do is open it up on your desktop and save it as a PDF file. That way it loads instantly, and you can have it and you can give it to people. This is the Google document version, which takes forever to load because that's where I wrote it. And I just posted it inside of the chat, and it says this comment has failed to post to Genesis Baptist Church. What the heck? I don't.
Well, that's
know
because we're simulcasting.
Oh, that's right. Okay, here
so
I will
on our
paste
channel and Kent's.
Here, I'll privately paste it to you. Then. Here you go.
I'll do it. I'll worry about it while you're presenting.
There you go. It's in the private chat, so you guys can give it to them. I cover everything in it, everything you can imagine that's radiometric dating oriented, except for probably carbon dating, like what we covered now. I'm not interested in carbon dating. Carbon, everything can throw off carbon dates, and it doesn't prove the age of the Earth anyway. So I cover a lot, and I'm actually working on a study right now that's going over all of these paradoxes that we've talked about today. It's called From Paradoxes to Predictions, a unified theory of recent population dynamics. And what it is it's going to be going over the paradoxes, which is the forager paradox population. Anyway, we just covered them a little bit today, and how easily it's all solved with a biblical creation model. So we'll cover that at some other time. And you'll notice something interesting, though, when you get into the radiometric dating, is that they all use circular reasoning to date one another, because they're all starting with the assumption that it's just true to begin with. If you just take those away, they're gone. They just fall apart. Like, we don't have evidence that there's actually more than one ice age when we look at the ice cores. Matter of fact, after 2,000 layers of ice core counting, you run out of layers to count because the mass above it is so big that it compresses everything into one gigantic mass. And so they have to, again, go back to radiometric dating because there's nothing to count except for maybe some bubbles of air. So if there's not that to count, then they might count some ash if there was a volcano. But again, speculative, right? So let's see, we covered radiometric dating, carbon dating, C4 spreading. Okay, let's go over the fossil record real quick. Why not, right? Okay, what does the fossil record show us? I like these lines right here because they show us different dinosaur species that existed and where they came up with. And we'll notice something, that there's ghost lineages of dinosaurs arriving kind of out of nowhere. The white lines are what they don't have evidence for. I wrote fable on here. And what we factually have evidence for is what we find. And then what's unique is that if we take those away, all those white lines, we literally just have the evidence of literally biblical creation, where it's literally things just arose. I find it funny too, because I saw this comment go by earlier too, like, how come we don't find a rabbit in the Cambrian period, right? It's like, well, they didn't live in the ocean. That's why we would say is creationist. But this guy says the fossil record, even 80 million years ago, he wouldn't be surprised if he did find a rabbit there, because the fossil record is literally such a jumbled mess for them that they can find anything there. R and Ra would say fossils are rare. That's why we don't find them. Well, guess what? When we go and we look at this, we find the exact same pattern that we always find.
Isn't that funny? Because that's what I predict the response to the lack of evidence for the evolutionary story of the hominin fossil record. That's what I predict their response is going to be. Right. Fossils are rare.
Just they have to say, well, they're just rare. You can't find them.
Well, then if they're so rare and they only have an extremely tiny fraction of the representation of biological life on this planet, that means they have a very incomplete story. So it's like having a puzzle. You know, you get those really massive puzzles that are tedious to put together, where you've got like 1,000 pieces. Okay, so if you put together like a quarter of that puzzle, that's like what they have for data for their evolutionary story. Then you're gonna have to guess everything else. Well, maybe if we had all the other pieces, it would look something like this. But the reality is, what you're gonna guess that the rest of it looks like is probably so different than what it actually looks like. And that's what they're doing with the evolutionary story.
Right, exactly. They admit they don't have pieces of the puzzle, but yet they tell you that that piece of the puzzle is a fact and it's true. You know, that's funny.
Hey, see, Zach, we
Oh,
agree.
he admits
We
what we know.
agree that see,
Totally agree.
and that's why a lot of your evolutionary biologists or geneticists, they would agree. He says fossils are cute, but genes are where it's at. Yeah, fossils are cute, and but when it comes to answering the question of ancestry, I think it's genetics. It's our genes, traits, and genetics that are inherited sperm and egg. That's the direct way to answer this question of ancestry. A fossil is not inherited sperm and egg. Geography is not inherited sperm and egg. And so I think the best lines of evidence for both creation and evolution actually exist in the world of genetics. So that's where the battle is. But unfortunately, there's still many proponents of evolution that do look very strongly and passionately to the fossil record. And so that's why I appreciate you engaging that issue for us, Matt. Brother, continue.
Yeah. The fossil record is a mess for them. They admit that there's all kinds of inconsistencies. That's why me and you really don't go to it. It's almost like picking on somebody. It's like, okay, yeah, we don't have a lot. We don't have the details. So why are you pointing it out? It's like, I don't know. You're the guys that bring it up all the time. You're the guys that reach to the fossil record. And then we point out that it's a disaster. And you guys go, so what? Well, make up your mind. Is it evidence or is it not? I don't know. How about bat evolution? That one's a really good one. They love their bat evolution. But yet there's like literally no steps to any of this. It's just another ghost lineage. It's just like cats. They just kind of arise out of nowhere. They just appear fully formed as bats. And yet they'll say, well, there's a missing link somewhere out there. There's probably one that formed into different bat lineages, but we don't really have it. But they still show you in the textbooks, the evolutionary line of bats from rats. I don't know why. It's just part of the story. They kind of have to, right? They don't have the evidence, but they'll tell you it happened anyway. They don't have any evidence for the fish evolution, no missingly common ancestors. I like this one right here. They go, the actual fossil record for the major animal phyla, as documented in the Cambrian explosion. Vertical lines indicate the actual fossil record of the phyla. The dotted lines, which are here, lines mark the Cambrian, the Precambrian boundary. Richard Dawkins says in the Cambrian expansion, fauna are already in an advanced state of evolution at the very first time they appear, as if they were just planted there without any evolutionary history. Interesting, right? What did the Ernest Mayr say? He goes, there's, discontinuities are overwhelmingly frequent. New species usually appear in the fossil record suddenly, not connected to their ancestors by a series of intermediaries. So that's what we're pointing out here. We're saying, look at the solid lines. That's what we know. And then look at the dotted lines. That's inference. They need convergence though. So they can infer that there's a relation, but without any genetic evidence to confirm it, it's just story. So that's why they say, well, fossils are rare. It's very easy for them to do. They can get away with it. Like, how many dinosaur T-Rexes were supposedly alive? They guessed 2.5 billion T-Rexes existed. That's a whole lot of T-Rexes. So when you look over, this is all that we find out of that 2 billion. That's not a very high percentage, right? Yet they admit 2.5 billion Rexes once existed and walked on Earth. That means they should be everywhere.
Look at Spinosaurus. So one of my favorite dinosaurs has always been Spinosaurus since Jurassic Park 3 came out. Like, what a cool dinosaur, right? But I remember being disappointed. If I remember correctly, Spinosaurus, if you were to look it up, I'll look it up while you're presenting, very little of Spinosaurus is even known from the fossils. Just a tiny portion of its fossils have been found. Again, like you're saying, what we see in terms of the illustrations, and we're not saying that they're all wrong or anything, but how they make it look in the textbooks, in the movies, right? Land Before Time, for example, they've got this whole created world, this Pokemon world, right? Where it's like there's so much philosophy and imagination and storytelling built into there. We got these massive populations of these dinosaur types and this imaginative story about their environments and what they were doing and how they were living and all these things. But yet what's known about these dinosaur species and non-dinosaur species too. I get they would say like a pterodactyl or a plesiosaur is not a dinosaur, but you got flying reptiles and sea-dwelling reptiles. It's really only known, as you said, Matt, on fragmented data, very poor data. Isn't that right?
Yeah, very poor data. Because if they're finding things and then they're broken up, now they have even more of a problem because they are like, okay, we've got this, but how do we actually make this form? And then how do we add skin to it? They don't have any soft tissue on the outer parts of a lot of these things. So they had to infer what was actually going on. And you can know from the skulls that they found, the stories that they played with those things. Holy cow.
Yeah. So here, Spinosaurus. Why are Spinosaurus fossils so rare? So here it says 6 main partial specimens of Spinosaurus have been described. So what that could mean, like I know when they say, oh, Australopithecus afarensis, we've got 400 specimens. When people hear that, they think, oh, they've got 400 full skeletons of this creature, this hominin. So 400 specimens, you think like a population, a family of 400, right? But what they mean by that is just 400 different pieces of bone, not just 400 individuals. So when they say 6 main partial specimens of Spinosaurus have been described, I guess that means, well, we'd have to dig deeper. Does it mean 6 main partial specimens? So they have 6 individuals, but each individual, it's only partial remains. I'm not sure. We'd have to look at it, but nonetheless, let's see here. Yeah. So nonetheless, T-Rex, Tyrannosaurus Rex, more than 40 specimens, but is that specimens like 40 bones, 40 fossils?
We'll never know.
Full,
each one, yeah.
Oh, let's see. Some of which are nearly complete skeletons. And so this goes back to your point, which is a very important point, that these stories that you see told in the textbooks, in the children's storybooks, in the children's movies, they're very exaggerated. We find a couple specimens of this dinosaur, and then they extrapolate that to mean, hey, here's this huge population, here's the history of it. But just like Erectus, just like any of these dinosaurs, where are the billions of bodies? Oh, fossils are rare. Okay, well, then you have a very incomplete, weak story.
Right. Yeah, and they do with all of these. Notice I've shown you dinosaurs. We've gone over mammals, bats, marsupials, a wide range of animals. Now we're looking at fish. You'll see their lines. They exist, and then there's no convergence on common ancestor. They just don't exist. Look, they're missing in every single case.
Huge gaps.
They're missing. Where are they? They only have them. No ancestor. They're missing. That's the fossil record. The evidence shows clearly that there's independent lines of ancestry rising, and then they arise out of nowhere, a ghost lineage, and then they stay nearly unchanged, which is stasis. Evolution means change. Stasis means no change. How in the world can you predict that things are going to change and then you find the exact opposite happening and then still claim your theory is valid? It's literally falsified. It's so easy to falsify when the main theme is stasis.
Well, if you can see my screen, it's like these massive puzzles here, right? You can see various pictures, these kids or people are putting together these puzzles. So what we have with the evolutionary story is it's basically like, okay, in terms of the puzzle, and just like Aaron Ross said, fossils are rare. It's like they've got just a small portion here, and then maybe like a corner and a corner. Everything else, they're guessing. They're extrapolating what everything else is based on the small pieces they have. So chances are what they're guessing or imagining in their historical reconstruction, the truth is so much different. I mean, we find that. I mean, how many Netflix shows do you watch or Amazon Prime shows where it's like a whodunit show, whodunit mystery, right? A good thriller, which I love. And at first, the pieces of evidence point to Mr. Smith being guilty, right? But then as more and more evidence accumulates and then the twists are revealed, it's like the person who actually did it, it blows your mind. It's your popular twists in these shows. You're like, wow, really? That person did it? And that's how it is. The evolutionists, they're so confident about their historical reconstruction and the story that they convey to everybody about the history of life. But the reality is, what's really going on is extremely different from what they're portraying. And we would argue it's closer to what the biblical model describes. Because you know what? We have Genesis. We have the birth certificate of the universe. We have the account of human origins and the history of this universe written down in a reliable historical source. So we don't have to guess. Yeah, there's pieces we have to fill in. I mean, the entire account of the flood is what, one chapter? Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So obviously that's where flood models come into play. You got hydroplate model, vertical plate tectonics, catastrophic plate tectonics. Okay. You got variations because we're just discussing the details because the Bible doesn't really give us all the details. It just gives us a one chapter story of what happened during the flood. And so we have to make scientific hypotheses. We have to model build, and that's fun, but a lot of it is, us kind of making guesses, making points. Some are more valid than others, building models, making predictions. Anyways, go ahead, brother.
You're going to love this. I just pulled it up. Okay. Get ready, my friend. The exact number of Homo erectus individuals living over 1.7 million years is unknown. Scientists have been able to identify only a few dozen individual Homo erectus specimens from this time period.
See,
and then down here, fossil limitations.
Actually, the challenge just became worse for them. Notice on the screen, 1.7 million years ago. So that's almost 2 million years. That's double than what I was saying. Almost,
Yes.
I said 1 million plus. And so they admit here only a few dozen individual Homo erectus specimens.
Oh, man.
And again, that could just mean a specimen to them could be a single bone, isolated bone. Because with erectus, and I'm willing to be corrected, I don't have everything at the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure they only have one nearly complete example, which is Turkana boy. And everything else is isolated, fragmented. And again, they can all be fit into the trunk of a car. But yet we're supposed to believe that they existed on this planet for almost 2 million years. Okay, again, we had a thought experiment earlier. Let's say their generation time was 20 to 25 years. Where are the billions and billions of dead bodies? Where's the campsites? Where's the evidence for their existence? No, all of this that we see fits within the biblical model. We only find a few examples because, you only go back 4,500 years since the flood. Okay, we're not expecting these massive populations of erectus, right, Matt?
Right.
We're not expecting these massive populations of Neanderthals. That's great right there. I mean, huge limitations in the fossil record. But if they make a movie of erectus, they're going to have this elaborate story where they've filled in the blanks on that massive puzzle, right? Like with, what was it years ago? Was it Nebraska Man where they found one tooth, and from that tooth they knew what the person looked like, who the tooth belonged to, and what his wife looked like. Could you imagine? They find my tooth and then from my tooth they know what my wife looked like.
Yeah.
Or they know what my kids look like. Maybe they'll know what you look like from my tooth since you're a good friend of mine. And then and then what did they discover, brother? That tooth belonged to what? A pig.
Pig, I think.
Yeah. There goes all the drawings of Mr. Nebraska Man and his wife based on a pig tooth.
Yeah, I know. Unbelievable, huh?
Well, then they'll say, oh, but that's such an old example. Okay. In this book here by Dr. Rob Stadler, he gave a presentation on our channel, The Scientific Approach to Evolution. Okay, he talks about a recent example where there was a certain T-Rex, possibly Eutyrannus. I can't remember all the details, but he discusses it in this book. And so basically, these fossils, paleoanthropologists, I think Jack Horner presented on it. Anyways, they derive from these fossils multiple species. Species A, species B, species C. But then they discovered it's all one species. I think it's Eutyrannus. It's a type of Tyrannosaurus Rex. But it's actually all one species. Okay. But in different stages of its life. So it would be like finding, fossils of your family, but because of the variation, they conclude it's the different hominin species or something. But really it's just, somebody as an adult, somebody as a infant, somebody as a toddler, teenager. That's all. It was the same animal, but in different, but yet they concluded, because fossils are low quality, low confidence data, they actually concluded incorrectly, erroneously, that these were different species. So,
Right.
I mean, no, it's not just, well, Nebraska man was so long ago. No, they're still making these kinds of mistakes. And you know what? They don't discover that these are mistakes, Matt, until years later. So what about the stuff they're pushing right now? How do you know in 50 years they're not going to come out and say, oops?
Oh, everything that we learned in school is pretty much wrong by now. They've thrown out all that, which is so funny that now they tell you it's a fact, but in 5 years, those textbooks will as well also be in the trash, and there'll be a whole new rule of facts. We just learned more. Okay, so
Right.
It's funny how you didn't admit that and you believed it was a fact back then. They're not open-minded. They're completely biased. That's why they just stand by it so much. And they say it doesn't matter, but they'll argue all day long, proving that it totally matters to them.
Amen, brother. There's a science fiction religion. Anyway, did I cut you off there? Were you still in the middle of presenting a piece of evidence?
I was, but it's actually getting late, kind of. I didn't expect to be this long. I think I gotta go.
Well, I think we both got to go. Can I touch just for 2 minutes here on C14, and then we'll completely wrap it up?
Okay.
Okay, here. I'll run through this quick. We said 3 hours, and here's something I wanted to show. Just a lot of what we're talking about, Matt, it's technical, isn't it? It's sophisticated stuff.
Person, they don't, yeah.
So here's something basic for everybody. Neanderthals. Some say they're different species. Some say there's no way they can descend from Adam and Eve. Okay, we've been talking about a lot of technical genetic data. Look at this. Very clear, very easy. 1856, this is how they portrayed Neanderthal. Some brutish beast, half ape, half man like creature, right? Something you'd see in a movie or comic book. Now, based on what we know about Neanderthals with their genetics, this is what a Neanderthal looks like. If you saw that child on the street dressed in modern day clothes, what would you think, Matt?
Just a random kid.
Just a random kid. Looks no different than your kid or my kid. Reconstruction of Neanderthal child. And we're going to say that they were a different
species.
No. I mean, look at this. Research suggests they fashioned tools, buried their dead, cared for their sick, conversed with each other, cared for each other. I mean, you and I, we did a whole 3-hour, 4-hour program on this, so people can check it out. I went through all these different slides. Very sophisticated people group. They fished in the open sea for tuna, open water fish. Neanderthals and humans, less different than polar and brown bears. Anyways, lots of stuff there. So real quickly, I want to go. So if I click hide, you can still see my slides, brother. Oh, as supporting evidence for what you were saying earlier, notice this. As it turns out, 95%. So even though fossils are rare and we only have a small portion of them, so a very incomplete picture for the evolutionists, right, Matt? Well, notice this. Out of the small portion of fossils that we actually have, 95% of them are shallow marine invertebrates, mostly shellfish, a lot of sharks, right? But sharks we have through teeth because they don't fossilize. So we got their teeth, like megalodon. really cool, massive, scary shark, 80 feet. We really only know it from its massive teeth. For instance, clams are found in the bottom layer, the top layer, and every layer in between. So when they say, oh, we got this nice order of evolution, large scale evolution, fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals. No, we find shallow marine vertebrates and marine organisms all throughout the rock layers. There is no evolution, just clams. The same could be said of coral, jellyfish, so on and so forth. So they said, well, how come, you don't find rabbits in the Cambrian, or why do you find dinosaurs in a certain layer, mammals in another layer, reflecting evolution? It's like, you guys only have a few T-Rex bones. You only have a few Spinosaurus. Your fossil record is very incomplete. That's why when we challenge you, you say things like, well, fossils are rare. Okay. So this order that they talk about is largely imaginative, because they're making conclusions based on very little pieces of the puzzle present. Isn't that right, Matt? And so notice this. Of the 5% remaining fossils, Matt, if you do have to go, though, I don't want to keep you. Did you want to go, and I'll run through these for 10 minutes just so?
Yeah, sure. Probably the best.
Yeah, do that. And that way, I don't have the anxiety of, I better fit, because I probably could go through these for 10 minutes. So you get out of here, brother, and I'll wrap us up. Okay.
All right. Sounds good. Bye, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the book.
God bless you, brother. Great stuff. Great stuff.
Talk to you soon.
So there we go. We've had an excellent show so far. We had Kent for an hour. We've had Matt for 2 hours. And I'm going to wrap us up here for 10 minutes. Since I can't see the chat, I'll pull it up on my phone. Looks like we've had some positive feedback. We've had a great chat. We've been simulcasting as well. So we've had a good 100 to 200 people enjoying this. So again, this just shows how low quality, low confidence the fossil record is. Of the 5% remaining fossils, 95% of them are algae and plant fossils. In that left are over 5% of the 5% insects and all vertebrates. So the point is, very little data when it comes to fossils, and most of it is perfectly in line with biblical creation expectations. And so I wanted to briefly go over, I'm doing a series, an all-encompassing, comprehensive series on evidence for biblical creation. So make sure to check out episode 1. It is available for people to see. It's primarily a introductory episode to the series, but I am going to be covering everything, going to make sure it's as up to date as possible, best arguments available. So I did want to touch on carbon-14. Okay. So carbon-14 created in the upper atmosphere through cosmic ray bombardment, and C14 decays into nitrogen-14. We as humans, we eat plants, we eat animals. Plants and animals are taking in C14. So we're constantly having our C14 decay back into nitrogen-14, but we are consuming plants and animals that are also taking in C14 to build their bodies. Okay. So it's this process that's taking place. The problem is, though, when we die, when a creature dies, they no longer take in C14. So it just decays back into nitrogen. But the half-life on C14 decay is very short. It's about 5,700 years. Okay. What this means is we should not find any C14 in anything on this earth and in this earth that is supposedly millions to billions of years, because it should have all decayed away. And I would say about 100,000 years. We're being generous. But even if every atom in the whole earth were carbon-14, they would decay so quickly that no carbon-14 would be left on Earth after only 1 million years. So when we look at dinosaur bones, coal, diamonds, natural gas, so on and so forth, when we look to basically anything with carbon in it that's older than 1 million years, I mean, dinosaurs, they say, go back 65 million years, we shouldn't find any C14. Pretty basic, right? Well, notice this. Here's one example. Okay, this is a sea creature called an ammonite, was discovered in Redding, California, accompanied by fossilized wood. Both fossils are claimed by Strata, listen to this, guys, dating to be 112 to 120 million years old. So there shouldn't be any C14. And the scoffers, the critics, because they're so uninformed and unsophisticated, they'll say, oh, it's just trace amounts. No, it's a lot more than just trace amounts. Okay. Notice this, but yielded radiocarbon ages of only thousands of years. Why is there any C14 at all being found in a fossil, two fossils that are supposedly 120 million years? Okay. So we find C14 in coal, suggests ages of thousands of years, clearly contradict ages of millions of years. We find it in oil. We find it in fossil wood. Diamonds. Diamonds are the hardest substance on this earth. They're found deep within the earth. Therefore, they're shielded and guarded from cosmic ray bombardment. Therefore, the C14 in them will be intrinsic to the diamonds. We shouldn't find any, yet we do. We find a lot of C14 in diamonds that are supposed to be billions of years old. It should have all decayed away. Again, even if every atom in the whole earth were carbon 14, they would decay so quickly that no carbon 14 would be left on earth after only 1 million years. And yet we find carbon 14 in basically everything that has carbon in it: coal, oil, fossilized wood, diamonds. And your objections to this have been absolutely demolished. The critics are really failing at this piece. It's an irrefutable challenge that they're not adequately engaging. I'm looking at the chat. Let's see what the objections are, because we've engaged them all. Let's see what the best the critics have to offer. So here's a piece of evidence that is discriminatory. It is differentiating. It's not agnostic, because only one model, which is the young earth creation model, can account for this data. It's not agnostic where, well, both models can account for it. No. Notice this: geophysicist, well-qualified scientist, Dr. John Baumgartner, part of the rate research group, investigated C14 in a number of diamonds. There should be no C14 at all if they really were over 1 billion years old. Yet the radiocarbon lab reported that there was over 10 times. So these guys, like, for example, in my first episode, they said, one commenter said, oh, it's just trace amounts. They don't know. Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge, the 5 Ds of skeptic dodgeball. And so it's not just trace amounts. Again, over 10 times the detection limit. Thus, they had a radiocarbon age far less than 1 million years. Dr. Baumgartner repeated this. Notice this, with 6 more. This is not just like an anomaly where you got one example. No, he repeated this with 6 more alluvial diamonds, and these had even more radiocarbon. Guys, it's a great time to be a biblical creationist. If you're going to debate a deep time evolutionist, master this argument, they have no good response. The presence, so this means diamonds and C14 are a creationist best friend. I'd like to write a handbook, a creationist best friend, and we'll touch on everything C14 related. The presence of radiocarbon in these diamonds where there should be none is thus sparkling evidence for a young world, as the Bible cries. So notice this, guys. Here's their rescue devices. Let's leave no stone unturned. So the first cry is contaminate. Oh, it's all contamination. Well, firstly, these labs, they know what they're doing. They're sophisticated. They're smart people. They're very careful people. They subject these samples with very harsh acid treatments. Okay, notice this. Yet for 30 years, AMS radiocarbon laboratories have subjected all samples before they carbon 14 date them to repeated, notice this, repeated brutal treatments with strong acids and bleaches to rid them all of contamination. And when the instruments are tested with blank samples, they yield what? 0 radiocarbon. So there can't be any contamination or instrument problems. It's been dismantled. This one's funny. So they'll say, more informed critics will use this one. They'll say, well, nearby material, nuclear material, can recharge the C14 in diamonds. Well, the rate team looked at that, and you would require thousands of more nuclear material. 13,000 times, I think it was, that they concluded to recharge the C14. In other words, unrealistic amounts of nuclear material. New radiocarbon. This is their cry. This is their rescue device. New radiocarbon was formed directly in the fossils when nearby decaying uranium bombarded traces of nitrogen in the buried fossils. Carbon-14 does form from such transformation of nitrogen, but actual calculations, notice this, demonstrate conclusively this process does not produce the levels of radiocarbon that world-class labs have found in fossils, coal, and diamonds. Okay, this is technical stuff. To break this down, let me use an analogy. Let's say you have a big carton of milk, okay, a gallon of milk, and you poke a big hole through it, a big hole. And so a lot of the milk is now gushing out. It's leaking out quickly. Well, it's not going to be long before there's no more milk left in that carton. That's akin or analogous to C14. C14 decays rapidly. Short half-life, shouldn't be any left anywhere in these samples that are supposedly millions of billions of years old, yet we find them, which means there hasn't been enough time for it to leak out because the earth isn't millions of billions of years old. See, it's basic. So what's the most parsimonious answer? The simple answer is oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes the correct answer. Okay. Now they're saying nearby nuclear material can recharge the C14. Okay. That doesn't work. So let's say you have another milk carton, a gallon of milk. Take a little pin, hairpin or something, and just poke a tiny little hole in it. That is your leakage rate that is akin to your other dating methods. Okay. Your other radioisotope dating methods that decay slower. Potassium to argon, uranium to lead, so on and so forth. So how are you going to fill up the milk carton that's just gushing out milk because you poked a huge hole into it with another milk carton that's just dripping out milk, one drop at a time? The rate is too small in comparison to the fast rate where you have your carton of milk that's just gushing out milk. If you try and replace that with a couple drops here and there, it's never going to counterbalance the leakage. Okay. So what you would actually need is about 100 different milk cartons, poke a tiny little hole with a pin, and then hopefully you can get enough milk that's leaking out of each of those milk cartons to refill the milk carton that's gushing out a ton. See how it doesn't work? It's a rescue device. It's weak. It's sad. It doesn't fit reality. And so that's been destroyed as well. Their best rescue mechanisms to answer this challenge of C14 in diamonds doesn't work. And those are their two main ones. Just to run through these real quick, we're going to be doing entire programs on each of these. More evidence for a young earth. So the title of this program is now going to be Irrefutable and Undeniable Evidence for a Young Earth Creation. Dinosaur blood cells, blood vessels, proteins, hemoglobin, osteocalcin, collagen, histones, and DNA. They're all found in dinosaur fossils. How can this be the case if these dinosaurs are supposedly 65 million years old? This should have all decayed away. The DNA should have decayed away. The red blood cells should not be there, or vessels, the proteins. Living fossils, jellyfish, coelacanths, stromatolites, Wollemi pine. There's hundreds of living fossils. I did a whole series with Dr. Carl Werner. I recommend people check it out. Hundreds of species that remain unchanged over hundreds of millions of years, up to billions of years in the cases of stromatolites. So the millions to billions of years are therefore not real. They don't fit reality because the extreme stasis is contradictory to that idea. I talked about this one earlier. Flume tank research, these flume experiments that John Mackay and other young Earth creationist geologists have done. Also, secular scientists, you can look up experiments in stratification to see these layers forming rapidly. Flume tank research with sediment of different particle sizes show that layered rock strata that were thought to have formed over huge periods of time in lake beds actually formed very quickly. Even the precise layer thicknesses of rocks were duplicated after they were ground into their sedimentary particles and run through the flume. And so just picture a ton of different flumes going on, these flume experiments going on during the year-long flood. We have all these layers, you have limestone, all of these different things forming rapidly. Okay. And we've seen it in real time, like coal, oil, natural gas. Oil, for example, has been created quickly, rapidly in the lab. All you need is a lot of heat, pressure, and energy. And we know there would have been a lot of heat, pressure, and energy released during the flood. The pre-flood world was the perfect battery to rapidly form things like coal, oil, natural gas, and then a lot of that heat that was used to form these things can be absorbed as well. Okay. The lunar recession, Kent talked about this one earlier. Tidal friction causes the moon to recede from the Earth at about 4 centimeters per year. It would have been greater in the past when the moon and Earth were closer together. The moon and Earth would have been in catastrophic proximity, the Roche limit, at less than a quarter of their supposed age. Kent talked about this in detail. Not a problem if the Earth is 6,000 years old, but if it's 4.5 billion years old, then yes, it is a huge problem. If the Earth is only 6,000 years old, there's no problem, because in that time, the moon would have only moved about 800 feet. It's trivial, 250 meters. But most astronomy books teach that the moon is over 4 billion years old, which poses a major dilemma. Less than 1.5 billion years ago, the moon would have been touching the Earth. Another thing, too, about the magnetic field. Dr. Russ Humphreys, PhD, young Earth creationist. He's either an astronomer, cosmologist, or astrophysicist. Anyways, he's qualified. And he predicted if young Earth creation is true and magnetic fields decay so rapidly, some of the outer planets, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing his predictions here, so don't quote me too exact, but basically he predicted that if the universe is young, right, these outer planets would have evolved later, or would have evolved earlier, I should say, than the Earth. They evolve, and then billions of years later, millions of billions of years later, the Earth evolves. So therefore, the magnetic fields of those outer planets, like take Uranus, should have decayed away. They shouldn't have any magnetic fields. Prediction made, guess what? Years later, when they got the data to see if that prediction is true or false, it turns out those planets do have magnetic fields. The fact that they have magnetic fields means that they're not billions of years old, and that's a confirmed prediction made by a young Earth creationist scientist. It would be like me leaving my coffee here, okay? Nice, fresh, hot coffee, and I leave the house. Something came up, I leave the house. My wife didn't know I left the house. She was wondering when I left the house, why I left the house. If she came downstairs to my studio and she saw steam still coming from the coffee, or she took a sip and it's still hot, then an easy conclusion is that the coffee hasn't been sitting there that long. But if it's ice cold and the cream is curdled, then then obviously it's been sitting there for a long period of time. So the fact that these planets, a lot of these planets still have magnetic fields, some of them still have rings. Okay, there's other lines of evidence too we could point to in astronomy, tells us they haven't been there that long. That's the whole point. And okay, I think we'll wrap it up there. Another thing, though, I do want to recommend people check out our latest show with Dr. Jason Lisle, because when it comes to testable and falsifiable predictions, he made an amazing prediction before we got the data from the James Webb Space Telescope that your furthest galaxies would show evidence of maturity. Okay. Our galaxy is the Milky Way galaxy. It's mature. Okay. And the evolutionary model would say, according to the Big Bang Theory, mature, fully formed galaxies like the Milky Way galaxy would not have evolved or formed until later. Okay. But when we look out into the furthest reaches of space, what we find are mature galaxies, fully formed, functional galaxies. Dr. Jason Lau made that prediction. When we got the James Webb Space Telescope, as far as you can look, you've got mature, fully formed galaxies. But the further you go back into the universe, closer to the Big Bang and the origin point, you should find primitive galaxies. They also shouldn't have the types of elements that we see in galaxies here closer to us, but yet you find them as well. You maybe find like a little bit of hydrogen, okay, maybe helium, and I recommend checking out that video with Dr. Jason Lau. The point is, confirm predictions, mature galaxies as far as you can see and observe. Just truly incredible evidence for young Earth creation. And okay, I think we're going to wrap it up there, guys. That's been a fun 3.5 hours of amazing evidence for young Earth creation. We touched on a lot. Dr. Dino was here. Matt was here. Several of the critics were here. We were able to engage their comments, their questions. And so, okay, I hope everybody had as much fun as I did. Share this around on Facebook. Share this around on social media. Share it to your friends, your family. Show everybody what an amazing time it truly is to be a biblical creationist. That's why I've titled my newest series, Evolutionists Simply Can't Refute the Best Evidence for Biblical Creation. And when we discuss the best evidence for young Earth creation, like C14 and diamonds, for example, or the confirmed predictions made by people like Doctors Russ Humphreys and Jason Lyle, they have no good response. Even their rescue devices are lacking. They're unimpressive. They're disappointing. They're unsatisfactory. That's why we say the evolutionists, what they have is a science fiction religion. They hope, dream, and imagine that time, matter, and space came from nothing, that life came from non-living chemicals, and that all life, including banana plants and whales, are related through common ancestry. That is a science fiction religion, and that is why I say they hope, dream, and imagine. And they have a right. They have a right to that science fiction religion. They have a right to that evolutionary philosophy, but it is not science. It is not empirical. We have a good example here with Reboot, who has been sitting here nearly the entire time, and I have yet to see one single good, sophisticated rebuttal to anything that's been said so far in the world of geology, astronomy, genetics, biology, history. We've touched on it all today. And so see this as a go-to video that you can share around to people, providing some of the best evidence for creation, for young Earth creation, and against evolution and an old Earth. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. God bless, and Standing for Truth is out.